Welcome back to a new love for the Jamestown Bride series by best-selling historical romance author Indiana Wake. In Open Your Heart to Love, past disappointments and guarded hearts make trusting again feel like the greatest risk of all. In the growing colony of Jamestown, one woman must decide if protecting her heart is worth the loneliness it brings, or if love is worth the courage it demands. As faith is tested and hope begins to bloom, she'll discover that sometimes the life and love you fear the most is the very one meant to heal you. Settle in for a heartfelt story of second chances, quiet strength, and the bravery it takes to open your heart to love. Copyright Indiana Wake. Open Your Heart to Love by Indiana Wake. Chapter 1. Caroline Lawton had been walking along at the edge of Hyde Park since a little after 8 o'clock in the morning. The late summer chill was enough to make her pull her stylish cape a little tighter about her, but was just fine for keeping her alert. Caroline was looking for her uncle, Lord Lawton, a baron and the brother of her father. She knew he made his way into the park every day, walking as far as the lake before heading back to his lavish Mayfair mansion. It had been a habit of his ever since King James had opened parts of the park to gentlefolk, and Caroline was certain her uncle would appear sooner or later. She would have ventured into the park herself, but was still afraid of being trampled by thundering horses or fleeing deer. The park was still greatly in use as a private hunting place for the king and assorted dignitaries, something which Caroline herself had no interest in. No, she would wait for him on the edges, certain of the point at which he would appear, for it was on the most direct path back to Mayfair. When she had first set off from Belgravia that morning, leaving the house hours before her father would even think about stirring, Caroline had intended on going directly to her uncle's home. However, she had not visited that wonderful mansion since she was a child, back in the days when her father and his brother had still just about been on speaking terms. Whilst she was certain none of her uncle's staff would find some way to convey her betrayal to her father, Caroline did not dare risk it. Her father could not be described as a reasonable man, so it was much better, if she were seen, to make it appear that she and Lord Lawton had crossed paths quite by accident. "Caroline?" Lord Lawton said in surprise as the two came face to face at the park's entrance. "Goodness me, how nice it is to see you," he went on, his pale blue eyes shining with pleasure. "To what do I owe this great honor? Or have I found you so far from Belgravia, when the day has hardly begun, quite by chance?" He chuckled, and Caroline realized he knew very well that she wanted something from him. "You have seen right through me before I have even spoken, uncle." Caroline smiled sweetly at him. She had always adored her uncle, and it had pained her since childhood to be forbidden his company as the brothers' strained relationship finally reached boiling point. It wasn't until 3 years ago, when Caroline had reached 18, that she had met Lord Lawton again after almost a decade of estrangement. She had been at a dinner hosted by a new acquaintance of hers when she instantly recognized the tall man with the heavy mustache and the straight back. In the sitting room where the guests had gathered prior to being seated for dinner, Caroline had taken her courage in both hands and approached him, not wanting another guest to introduce them and make things awkward. When her uncle had not only recognized her immediately but had smiled warmly, Caroline had almost cried with relief and emotion. She had no idea until that point just how much she had missed the kindly uncle who had always treated her with the respect that her father saw fit to withhold. From that moment onward, the two had maintained a very secretive little friendship, seeing each other only rarely, but both of them benefiting greatly from the warmth of a good family connection. So, when things finally took a turn for the worst and Caroline could feel the ground beneath her feet falling away, the only person she could imagine helping her at all was her uncle. "I can certainly see that you are not yourself, Caroline. I believe you are a little thinner than the last time I saw you, and your face is a little paler. Something is troubling you, and I know you would not have made your way to Mayfair on such a chilly morning without it being something rather serious." It is serious, Uncle, Caroline said, realizing with dismay that her eyes were filling with tears. Caroline had never been a young woman who tended to cry a great deal. Even as a child, she had quickly realized that such an occupation would get her nowhere, not with her governess, not with the housekeeper, and most certainly not with her father. Having no memory of her mother at all, Caroline had often wondered if she had been the sort of woman who would have cradled her through whatever little upsets she had suffered, not turning her back on her at the first sign of tears. But her father had never been keen to discuss her mother, growing angry with her every time she sought out such conversation, and so Caroline had given up on the whole thing, staying silent on the matter for many years now. Then walk back with me to the house, my dear, and we can sit down and talk about it properly. He clearly saw the look of consternation on her face. It is too early for you to be seen by anyone who might take the news back to your father. And as for my staff, they are already busy in the tasks of the morning. I promise, I shall not even ask for tea. Nobody will know that you were there. Yes, I suppose it is difficult to have a conversation of any depth here on the street. Caroline still felt unsure. It is no more than 2 minutes of brisk walking from here. I think we can risk it just this once, what do you say? His smile was so warm and reassuring that Caroline gave in, nodding and taking his arm so that they might set off immediately. Her uncle was right. It really did only take 2 minutes to find themselves at the front of his fine Mayfair mansion. He pushed the front door open himself and led her through the entrance hall and corridor she immediately recognized from her youth, until they reached his study. It is not the most comfortable, but nobody disturbs me here, he said as he ushered her into a wooden chair opposite his desk. He walked around the desk to his own chair, picking it up with ease and moving it so that he could sit beside his niece. He was such a kind man and looked so concerned that Caroline now hardly knew where to begin. For an awful moment, she wondered if her uncle would see her concerns as childish and selfish. How did she really know him after so many years of estrangement? Perhaps, despite his kindness, he was like so many others and held firm doctrines about the way that women should not only be treated, but how they should behave. You look as if you do not know if you can trust me, Caroline, he said, as if reading her thoughts. I know I can trust you, Uncle. Goodness, I would not be here now if I thought I could not, Caroline said, and knew that the time had come to tell him everything. Chapter 2. I suppose this has something to do with your father? Lord Lawton asked gently when it appeared that Caroline would not speak at all. Yes, it has everything to do with my father. But I suppose it is not just my father but society as a whole. Perhaps if you tell me a little bit more about it, I might be able to do something. About your father, I mean. Society is quite an unmanageable beast and I have very little control over that. He chuckled, and Caroline followed suit, knowing that he was trying to put her at her ease and grateful to him for it. I suppose, in some ways, I only have myself to blame, Caroline said, finally deciding upon a suitable way to begin. Why, what have you done? He leaned over and laid a comforting hand on her shoulder. I have become too learned, Uncle. You are a well-educated young lady, that is certain, but how is that so terrible? His words were like music to her ears. I suppose because it has given me ideas of my own. It has made me think for myself and voice my opinions from time to time. And your father does not approve. He nodded sagely. This was not a question. No, but his manner of disapproval grows stronger and more vehement. Why? I cannot say. It has been creeping up day by day and for so many years now. Caroline felt her fears dissolving, knowing that her uncle was on her side, even if there was very little he could do about any of it. He used to leave me alone with the governess as a child, happy enough that I was taught to read and write and draw. But I took to reading so quickly, and it was not long before I was searching for more. Subjects he would not care for you to be proficient in? Lord Lawton shook his head in faint annoyance. Which subjects? I studied mathematics in more depth than he would have liked. He dismissed the governess when I was 12 because he blamed her for it, even though she had done no more than teach me the basic arithmetic that every child in my situation would learn. It was not her fault, for that woman could not have taught me to such a degree because she did not understand it to such a degree. Then who did teach you? Books taught me, uncle. I read them by myself, learning more in my silent and secretive studies than I could ever have learned from my governess. And the poor woman was dismissed? Yes, but she was not a poor woman. She was of the same opinions as my father, and it was she who had gone to him first to tell tales of my own private studies. She had sought to win favor from her employer, and it had not turned out quite as she had hoped. Then I shall not waste any time or concern on the woman. Lord Lawton laughed. So, your father thought your learning would come to an end without the guiding hand of a governess who had not one half of your intellect? He shook his head. My brother is nothing if not consistently short-sighted. Quite so. He simply ignored me altogether, giving all his time and attention to Henry, which I suppose is natural. A father should have enough room in his heart for all his children, not just one. Goodness, it is not as though he had 6 or 7 to think about. Lord Lawton let out a great sigh. I wish I had been in your life more, my dear. I cannot tell you how guilty I feel for abandoning you the way I did. You must not feel guilty, for what choice did you have? I knew even then, as a girl of 8, that my father was capricious in his ways and determined in his bearing of grudges. I knew it too, which is why I should have tried harder to avoid the final conflict which wrenched us apart and saw him forbid me a welcome in his house. I should have kept a hold of my tongue. Caroline had never known exactly what the brothers had argued about, but she had always imagined it to be something of little importance, certainly nothing of such magnitude that one brother could deny the other for so many years. She had always had good sense and had known, even as a child, that her father resented his elder brother for the title, even though it had not been hereditary. The fact that the title had been conferred upon his brother had made Jeremiah Lawton all the more twisted because his brother had earned it. His brother, older by 2 years, was more successful, and he could hardly bear to look at him. Perhaps that was why Jeremiah Lawton was so incensed by his daughter's prowess in mathematics and the sciences. Perhaps it was just another area of life in which he could never be successful himself. Things have taken a turn of late, Caroline went on. I am no longer allowed to have books of any kind. I foolishly spoke out on a subject in which my brother was in error and all hell broke loose. It was a simple and very silly thing, but Henry is as proud and as arrogant as our father is. He made so much of it that soon they were both bellowing at me, shouting in my face as if I had committed some terrible, evil sin. Oh, my dear child, Lord Lawton said, and his face was a mask of sadness. Father has locked the library and forbidden me access. Not only that, but he and Henry barged into my private chamber and searched it for books. Which they found? Yes, found and burned on the fire in front of me. Even my diaries, my private thoughts, went up in flames before my very eyes. She paused and shuddered. Although, perhaps it was a mercy that they were burned rather than read, for I never did describe either one of them in glowing terms, and I would doubtless have suffered even greater punishment if they had seen it written down in my own hand. I remember you keeping a diary even as a girl. They burned them all? Everything. Even my sketchbooks. What could they find so threatening in the very work that ladies are supposed to be good at? She closed her eyes, pleased that the tears which had nearly come earlier had been thwarted completely. Their anger was so raw and so unreasonable. I have never been so frightened. Did he strike you? Lord Lawton shifted in his seat as if ready to run all the way to Belgravia and give his brother a thorough beating. No, but I think it only a matter of time. He says I must be married and out of his sight before I make him lose his reason. He says that marriage will be my only skill in this life, my only worth. It will not. His face was set in grim but muted anger. Has he some man in mind? No, but he is looking, and he makes no secret that the marriage will be to his advantage and not mine. I am so afraid of what sort of man I would be expected to marry. She took a steadying breath. I know that marriage would have come sooner or later, and I was reconciled to it. I do not look for love, nor do I have a romantic heart. But I could not bear to be married to a man like him, one who would deny me books. Good heavens, even deny me my own thoughts as my father did when he burned my diaries. My dear, I am so very sorry. Now that he is angry with me, I know he will seek out the worst man possible. You know he does not forgive and how easily he can dismiss his own kin. I am nothing to him, and I am so afraid that he will force me into a dreadful marriage to show me just that. Lord Lawton remained quiet for some moments, his eyebrows dipped as he ran a hand over his chin. Caroline could see that her uncle believed her every word. Furthermore, she knew that he thought as she did. His brother was of a pernicious disposition, and there would be no doubt that Caroline would pay for her perceived crimes. I sometimes wish I had been born to a poor family, Caroline said, breaking the silence. Why? Because women of the lower class have just a little more choice. They have work, a way to contribute to the world. But it is a necessity, Caroline. If they did not do something, they might starve. And I hardly think they are employed in such tasks as would broaden the mind and satisfy the soul. True. Perhaps not poor, but middle class. I could have been a governess or an artisan. Anything to alleviate the great gnawing boredom of being an upper-class woman. She sighed deeply. But there is no way for me to ever have that sort of life, is there? Not in England, Caroline. He sat up straighter. But perhaps elsewhere. He eyed her steadily. Elsewhere, she said incredulously. Uncle, I do not think women have any more say in things in Europe. I am not talking about Europe, he said, his eyes still on hers. I am talking about America. Chapter 3. Caroline was careful to only write in her little diary in the dead of night and the secrecy of her own chamber. For the rest of the time, she simply carried the little volume in the pocket of her skirt or tucked it away beneath her bodice. It was a tiny little book which her uncle had given to her when they met for a second time to discuss the idea of her running from England and heading to America in hopes of a new life. 29 sup r equals xlo /sup August 1621. How can I claw back the thoughts of a lifetime? Thoughts which have gone up in smoke and ash as if they had never existed in the first place. Perhaps that was the very point. Perhaps my father believes that burning my thoughts is a means to stop them existing. Well, it is not. Here am I at 3 o'clock in the morning, just one candle burning as I sit at my desk and begin to set down my thoughts again. I cannot look back to find the old thoughts and set them down, it would take too long. But even though I have decided to firmly set my sights on the future and never look back, still, I know the old thoughts. Why? Because they are me. I am my thoughts, we all are. And so, it would seem that it is not so easy to erase them as my father had assumed. But then, his own thoughts are simple, basic, barely formed. He is a man so low in his intellect and character that it is a good thing that he was born wealthy, else he would surely have starved. A man cannot live on his wits if he does not have any, after all. More than ever it is imperative that my diary is kept out of sight. I carry it with me always, even having it tucked inside my nightgown as I sleep. I dare say that the sensible thing to do would be to desist from my activities as the diarist of my own life until I am safely in America. But that would be to capitulate fully, and I shall never do that. If I embark on such an endeavor, even if only to spare myself, I shall capitulate forever, and I intend to start as I mean to go on. If I am to make the worst imaginable journey, risk my life for thousands of miles for nothing more than the right to be myself, then I shall be myself entirely. Being myself means capturing the moments of my life, big and small, so that I might one day be able to look back on it all with pride. Not the sort of pride that my father has, but genuine pride in one's own achievements, however they are regarded by others. I do not want to forget a moment of this. I do not want to consign it to a blurred history. The decision I have made is far greater than any my father has ever made in all his years, and I want to read these words when my life one day draws to a close and know that, despite his oppression, my courage and intelligence outstripped his definitively. I will not regret leaving my father, nor my brother, for they have never shown me a moment of love or kindness. Their fears and petty insecurities have rendered them unable to love me at all, for, to love me, they would be forced to respect me. It is that very respect that they cannot allow themselves to feel, for in their minds, it would diminish them in some way. That is how my brother found it so easy to be offended when I told him just a little of how much I truly do know and understand. That is why my father found it so easy to be angry with me, unable to get to the source of his rage lest he see exactly what lay behind it, his own inadequacy. One day I will be free of them, not just in terms of having thousands of miles between us, but free in my mind. Where there is no love, one should not cling on to the hurt of the past. To do so would be to hurt oneself forevermore, and, once free, the responsibility will be all mine. If I choose to wallow in the old injustices, the old pain, then I will simply prolong it, only this time I shall be the perpetrator as well as the victim. It all seems so very filled with logic and reason, and I know, deep down, that it is right. However, I am not so removed from the world and my own heart that I think this will be a simple task, for it will not. But a task it is, and one that I shall work at every day for the rest of my life if necessary. I will be rid of them in every way. My only regret is leaving my uncle behind. I know that he has only been a small part of my life these last years, owing to the secrecy of our friendship, but still, I love him dearly. He is as kind as my father is cruel, as clever as my father is stupid, and as reasonable as my father would appear to be quite insane. To add to all these wonderful qualities, my uncle has a capacity for love and caring and a sense of fairness in the world. I can hardly think that I have met another man who possesses such a fine character as him, and I shall miss him greatly. I shall miss the idea that I am not standing on the same soil as my uncle, and I shall always have the sense of us being divided by such a great expanse of ocean. I dare say when I have traveled that ocean inch by inch, that sense of regret will be greater still, for then I will know exactly how far away he is, I will be able to feel it. For now, even though I understand the figures entirely, the very sense of so many thousands of miles is something that I cannot quite comprehend. Still, there is much for me to do in my last days here at home. I'm pleased that my father and brother pay as little attention to me as ever they did, for it has been a simple thing for me to take my possessions, little by little, to the place where I meet my uncle every morning before my father is awake. He is storing my things, packing them bit by bit into a wooden trunk with his own hands so that there can be no hint of gossip from any of his household that might thwart my attempts to escape. That is not his only kindness, but there have been so many I can hardly list them. I must admit, however, that when he first talked of me going away to America to be married off to one of the colonists, I did not accept the suggestion with grace. I had immediately thought that he was doing no better than my father, deciding who it was I ought to marry and having no thought to the consequence that my life would be, for my life would surely only ever be a consequence from that moment onward. It would not be a life. My uncle went on to explain it all, however, graciously ignoring my little outburst of annoyance to calmly give me every detail. He has great investments in the Virginia Company, recognizing in his typically intelligent way what great profit there was to be had in tobacco. So, I suppose it was only natural that he should know every part of the scheme that the Virginia Company has devised to provide something of a more balanced society in the new colony. If I am honest, I can see a good deal of sense in it, for the world is made up of two sexes, and if one is taken away, the other becomes something unrecognizable. Yes, balance is needed in this world, it always has been needed, and it always shall. Whether the world will ever recognize it remains to be seen. I am pleased to report that my uncle made no false promises and did not do anything that would lead me to suspect that he is trying to sell me the scheme as a means of solving a rather awkward problem. Indeed, I could see the pain shining in his pale blue eyes when he talked of my going, the idea that I would likely never return. I believed him, and I believe him now. He knows his brother well, and I cannot think that my uncle would have suggested such a scheme if he thought that there was ever any hope of reconciliation. In truth, I did not need his confirmation of this, for I know in my own heart that reconciliation is something that will never be achieved if I remain here in England. All that will happen is that my worst fears will be realized, and my life will truly become nothing more than a consequence. At least, in this fashion, I will have a say. My uncle took me to speak to one of the officials from the Virginia Company, and he has told me that there are other officials in Jamestown who will see to it that I am well treated. And not just me, but all the other women who have agreed to make that dreadful journey to become maids for Virginia. The idea that I might say no to any potential suitor is something which appeals to me greatly. In theory, women have the right to say no here in England, but for those in my position, it is nothing more than a word. It holds no weight, and nobody will act upon it. In America, however, I am told that no will be accepted, both as a word and as a right. At first, I could hardly believe what I was hearing, even though I had a great sense it was true. The colonists, predominantly male, have lived these last years with very little female influence, and the authorities there are prepared to make such concessions to ensure future generations of English women will go gladly to America. I have agreed to it all, giving a list of my skills and abilities to the Virginia Company official that very day as I sat at his desk. I defiantly listed my great competence with mathematics and science, setting my sewing and other domestic skills further down the list. I realize, of course, that most potential husbands will be looking for the latter, but I am determined that, even if my greater skills cannot be used, that any potential suitor must see them and understand that they can never be relinquished for his sake. In the end, that is as much as I ask, and I do not think it a great deal. Despite the obvious pain of leaving my uncle, still, I am excited by the idea that these are my last few days in England. I do not relish the thought of the journey, but I am optimistic about my new life. There is now hope where I had thought none existed, and so I am truly grateful. I suppose it remains to be seen whether or not my hope and gratitude are misplaced, but there is never any telling what will happen in a life, is there? The only thing that is absolutely certain is the fact that, should I remain here in England, my life will undoubtedly be more miserable than I can imagine even now. And so, I will go. I will go to America and become a part of the new world with a spirit of optimism and a determination to always be myself. Chapter 4. So, you had to travel all the way to Bedfordshire so that you might turn around and come back to London? Goodness, what great lengths you have been forced to go to, Miss Lawton. Diana Walton, one of the other young ladies set to go to America, looked wide-eyed in admiration. I could not risk my father hearing that I had not traveled all the way post-chaise. I could not give him any reason to suspect. Caroline could hardly believe that she trusted the young woman in her company so implicitly. There was something kindred about Diana Walton, not to mention a great sense of trust. They had been just 3 days at the inn at Gravesend waiting for the good ship Warwick to finally set sail, and yet it had seemed to Caroline like a lifetime. In all her years, she had never found a friend to whom she felt so aligned. Diana was lower middle class, somebody that her father would never, ever, have allowed her to associate with before. But she was a fascinating woman, one driven by her own skills and her determination to be herself. Now that she had such a woman in her life, Caroline thought it little wonder that she had never been drawn to the dull-witted, pampered creatures of her acquaintance, those who only ever talked of making the best possible marriage in terms of title and wealth. Diana did not want to be handed anything, all she wanted was the opportunity to earn it for herself. Caroline had to admit to a little envy at the idea that this woman, this bright and determined young woman, had a genuine skill. Not a skill for sketching or singing, but a skill that could see her through life and help her find a way to support herself. If only the men around her had not tried to crush her spirit and her opportunities. Diana was a milliner, apprenticed to her father who had recently died. But as much as Diana had cared for her father, he had done her the ultimate injustice of handing his business to his son, a young man who had no skill or interest in the hat trade at all. Even in England, a daughter could inherit a business if it would ensure the survival of that business, so there was no legal reason why her father could not have done the right thing. More and more, Caroline knew that England was not the place for her anymore. It was a place of injustice and she wanted nothing more to do with it. "And you traveled alone?" Diana asked, interested rather than inappropriately inquisitive. "Yes, my father had agreed to that easily since I was only traveling for half a day and supposedly to his cousin in Bedfordshire." "So, your father's cousin had agreed to help?" "No, I am bound to say that she knows nothing of it. The entire thing is a deception, and I am not in the least bit ashamed of it." Caroline sniffed defiantly, and Diana laughed. "Good, for there is nothing to be gained with misplaced shame." "Quite so," Caroline said, smiling briefly and warming to the intelligent, sensible young woman who seemed to have somehow become her partner in all of it. Even though Diana was not running from England but had been forced to look elsewhere for her opportunities, they still had much in common. The other 4 women with whom they had been billeted were very nice indeed, and Caroline could plainly see that each and every one of them had their reasons for needing to go. In the end, it was a need for all of them rather than their first choice in life. But as much as she liked the other 4, she found herself drawn instantly to Diana, to her determination and her single-mindedness, to the fact that she already had a plan of how her life would go when they finally reached America. "Even now, do you suppose that your father still believes you to be in Bedfordshire?" "I am certain of it, for once I was gone from his house, he would not give me another thought. He would not think to write to me whilst in Bedfordshire, nor even bother to write to my cousin to be sure that I arrived safely. He would leave it to my cousin to make inquiries if I did not arrive, for such things are always somebody else's responsibility." She laughed. "And for the first time in my life, that has gone in my favor. There is only one person who knows of my plan, and he is the man who made it possible. We always remember the people who help us, those who see what we suffer and seek to rectify it in any way they can," Diana said, although she was not over gentle, and Caroline was grateful for that. The other ladies in the group were all kindness, all sweetness, looking out for one another in such wonderful ways. But Caroline had become a very different sort of woman over the years, perhaps because she did not have a mother to emulate, or perhaps because she had learned that any need for love and warmth was a weakness upon which others could capitalize. All in all, she found it too difficult and was grateful that Diana Walton seemed to be a woman who had been set in the same mold. It was comforting in a way that kind words and hand-holding would not have been for Caroline in those last days in England. "It was my uncle who wrote to my father pretending to be my cousin in Bedfordshire," Caroline said, wanting to at least give something of herself to the young woman who had chosen to be her particular friend, especially since Diana had told her every detail of her own life. "And it was my father himself who set me in his own carriage and told his driver to take me down to the coaching inn in the town and put me on the post-chaise to Bedfordshire. Because it was such a short journey and I was to be met, it was very simple. My uncle thought of it all, and I am bound to say that it was very clever of him. Yes, especially since your father will be none the wiser until we are already on the open sea." Diana smiled and nodded thoughtfully. "And even then, even once he realizes that you're gone, surely he will never suspect for a moment that you are on your way to another country entirely." Diana looked absolutely thrilled. "Exactly that." Caroline laughed for the first time in a long time. "I must admit, the idea does give me a little pleasure. Even though I know that it will not hurt my father never to see me again, I know that it will irk him as he wonders how I have escaped, where I have gone, and how I am managing. He will be incandescent with rage simply because he does not have the answers he seeks, and that will be his just reward, I believe. I wish I had walked away from my brother without a backward glance, Miss Lawton, but there was no need. I did not have to run away. He was only too pleased to see me go," Diana said and shrugged. "But a little bit of mystery might have been nice." "Yes, indeed." Caroline smiled. "And please, do call me Caroline." "Yes, of course, Caroline," Diana said, and Caroline could tell that the young woman was going to struggle with the notion for a few days. It was so ingrained, England and all her petty ways. As clever as Diana was, as skilled, as clear-thinking and determined to carve out her own life on her own terms, still, the poor woman could not overlook the fact of their different stations in life. Caroline had been handed certain privileges, but it did not make her better than anybody else. Those were not things to strive for, those were things which simply were, which simply existed. Caroline had no more control over the circumstances of her birth than Diana had over her own. Still, Caroline had great hopes that their shared ethics and determination and the undoubted deprivations of the journey they had ahead of them would be a great leveler, a thing which would make all men, or more importantly, women, equal. Suddenly, whilst Caroline was deep in thought, Diana Walton began to laugh. "What is it? What are you laughing at?" Caroline said with a smile. "Forgive me, it is just the idea of you traveling post-chaise all the way to Bedfordshire only to have your belongings put in another carriage altogether to bring you back to London. I don't know why, it is just amusing me." Diana continued to laugh, and Caroline found herself laughing also. "I know, it is quite ridiculous." There was something very freeing about the moment, about the irreverent little conversation between two women who would otherwise never have talked so openly. "I spent the entire day sitting in the back of a carriage. I was quite numb by the end of it." Caroline continued to laugh, not wanting to continue with the rest of the tale. It was enough then for Diana to know that she had gone immediately to the little inn at Gravesend where they all now awaited time and tide. The fact that she had stopped to meet her uncle just further north of the River Thames was not something that she was ready to share with anybody, not even Diana. It had been an emotional farewell, despite the estrangement of so many years and the infrequency of their meetings since they had renewed their friendship. Nonetheless, She loved her uncle deeply, and it was so much harder than she had imagined it would be to leave the one and only person who would remember, who would know where she was and mourn the loss of her. She had cried for the first time since childhood, leaning her head against her uncle's chest and weeping openly. Even though she could not have stopped her tears if she had been determined to, she would not have wanted to stop them. Her uncle deserved to know just how much she would miss him. "I reckon we will be setting sail tomorrow, Caroline," Diana said, still struggling with her new friend's Christian name. "There seems to have been a lot of activity down by the water today." "Yes, I would say that the good ship Warwick is likely near being fully laden. Still, we will know if they come for our luggage. Once that is loaded, I suppose we will have but minutes left to say goodbye to our old lives." "I will not need those minutes, not even 1 minute. I have not only bid farewell to my old life, I have bid it good riddance." "Then I shall do the same," Caroline said and smiled. What a good thing she had found Diana Lawton. Chapter 5. 20 sup r equals xlo th/sup September 1621. We have been on the open sea for some days now, the shores of England being nothing more than a memory. I am bound to say that my nausea has concerned me far more than the last sight of England did, but I shall set it all down here on the chance that I one day change my mind. I have spent some time on the upper decks trying to get a little fresh air. We are only allowed a little time to do so, and never when the water is anything other than calm. During the choppier waters, the time when nausea is at its greatest, we are confined between decks, or 'tween decks, as goes the parlance of the seasoned sailor. Anyway, it was during just such a calm excursion to the upper deck that I saw the shores of England for the last time. It would have slipped by without notice had I not heard one of the crew telling young Grace Bates to look behind her, to have her last sight of her old home. Poor Grace, just 16 years old, cried heartily, and I was forced to draw her to me, for there was no sign of Anne Wallace anywhere. Anne Wallace is an apothecary, and her skills are in constant demand with everybody so sick all the time. But Anne is Grace's particular friend and has a wonderful way of dealing with the child. It is a wonderful way which I am afraid I sadly lack, not having been past any of the motherly skills that ought to have been mine. Still, I did my best and, in the end, perhaps nothing more than a little human contact was all that Grace needed. As I held the child in my arms, I looked over her shoulder and across to what looked like a tiny slice of matter in the distance. It was land, but only as much as protrudes beyond the rest of the land. Even now, I am not entirely convinced it was England. My common sense tells me that it was either Ireland or Wales. Still, it mattered not to me, and I was certainly not going to mention it to poor young Grace. I turned my head a little to look forward and to the side, only to discover that there was nothing but the open sea all around us. This was it, I was free. It seemed an awful thing that my spirits soared as I cradled the head of a desolate young woman against my shoulder. I could not help myself, however sorry I was for Grace Bates, I could not help but feel my own feelings. I do believe I had a little taste of such feelings when I had traveled post-chaise to Bedfordshire. Even that little was a departure from my old life, for I had never traveled anywhere before on my own. I had asked my father if I might do so, suggesting that it would simply be quicker and quieter if I did, for there were no stops to make beyond those to refresh the horses. I would not be required to change carriage at all, and it would only be later that same day when I met with my father's cousin. My father had agreed readily, and it was from that moment on that my courage and sense of freedom began to grow. And to leave him and my brother as I was driven away from our fine home for the last time, was a feeling I can hardly begin to describe. I was nervous, of course, worried all the time that something might happen to upend my plan before I saw it come to fruition. But there was the burgeoning sense of freedom, the idea that I had surmounted one obstacle with ease and that any others which came between me and the good ship Warwick would be similarly dealt with. That feeling grew as my father's driver placed my small trunk of belongings in the back of the post-chaise, little knowing that almost everything else I possessed was in a much larger trunk which my uncle had sent on ahead to Gravesend. Still, it was necessary to keep up the pretense of visiting family in another county. I was supposed to be gone for 6 weeks, and the small wooden trunk was certainly appropriate for such an excursion. Even now, when I think of the planning that my uncle and I put into all of this, I cannot help but smile. It is not the cleverest thing I have ever done, it is not a concept so great that it would outshadow Euclid's teachings, but it is the most cunning thing I have ever done, and I am bound to say that it still gives me a little thrill to think of it. I am not a cunning person by nature, but to find that I have a skill for it where there is a necessity for it is a great comfort. I can live by my wits after all. My father's driver hovered until the time came for the post-chaise to set off, and that moment, that very moment, was one I truly will struggle to describe. It was an exhilaration, not only of the freedom from my father that I soon expected, but the curious excitement of traveling by oneself for the first time. It is true to say that it was not a particularly arduous journey, not something that some other young ladies do not make alone from time to time. But for me it was quite spectacular. It was the beginning of things, you see, my first step into a life where I have some say. I felt solitary, but not lonely. I felt nervous, but not afraid. The truth is that my overriding sense was one of excitement, of optimism, as if, in that small journey, I had become myself truly at last. However, to make this diary a full and truthful account, I can do no other than list my fears for the future. I cannot say that the excitement has waned necessarily, only that it has been joined by a little common sense and realism. After all, despite the fact that these men have been in the colony for some years, they are still English men. Despite the fact that they have been without female company, there is a good chance that they still hold the same old values dear to their hearts. The sort of values which have bitten deep into my soul for so long. Will I really find a man who will accept me as I am, never once trying to tamp down my intelligence and the knowledge I have painstakingly learned over so many years? I am not expecting love or romance, just acceptance and respect. As far as I am concerned, acceptance and respect are far more important, far more conducive to a contented life. I have spent a little time with Julia Darnley, feeling a little sorry for the woman who dares not ever go up on deck and look at the sea. I suppose we are very different in many respects, and that is just one of them. Where I look out and see the possibilities, Julia looks out and can only see that she has been set adrift. Still, I am not without understanding. In spending some time with her, I have realized just how much love and romance matters to her. It is not the idea of a suitable marriage, wealth, good surroundings, even handsomeness, which obsess her thoughts. It is finding somebody she loves who will love her in return. For Julia, it really is as simple as that, and, for her sake, I hope that her life will take just such a turn. When I think about it all in the cold light of day, I begin to wonder if Julia's expectations are far more easily achieved than my own. After all, it is not uncommon for a man to love his wife, is it? But for a man to accept that his wife has an interest in the world and wants to contribute in some way is far less common. What a good thing I have not added love and romance to this little equation, for it might never be solved otherwise. All I can do now, as I sit on this rotten old mattress chewing the hottest piece of ginger root imaginable to hold back the sickness, is hope that I find a sensible man with enough confidence to allow his wife her own character. And failing that, I sincerely hope that the words of the Virginia Company official were true and that I need never marry anybody, for I would always be looked after. Of course, I cannot allow myself to believe this until I see it with my own eyes. Nothing is ever as straightforward as it is given to be, even when the information is given with the purest of intentions. In the end, it all remains to be seen. Perhaps I would be better employed, for the time being at least, trying to come to terms with my seasickness in the hopes that I will survive this journey without losing very much more weight. I pray that my hopes are not in vain, for there is nothing else for me to do out here in the middle of the open sea. Chapter 6. As the party had sailed up the River James so many weeks later, Caroline already had a good idea of the topography she could expect when she arrived in Jamestown. She could see why it was that the area had been chosen for planting, in terms of good flat land, but she couldn't help but wonder if the marshy areas would cause problems that could only be rectified with good drainage. She smiled to herself, perhaps she was a little unusual after all. The good ship Warwick had dropped anchor in the middle of the river, not able to get any closer to the wharf than it was. The women were to be rowed across in small boats and Caroline didn't mind a bit. As far as she was concerned, it was the last obvious obstacle on the pathway to a new life. Of course, she was not naive enough to believe that her life would be without obstacles from this moment onwards. She just assumed that none of them would be physical. Look at them all down there, Diana whispered into her ear as the two of them stood side by side on the upper deck, their friends gathered about them. There's an awful lot of them, aren't there? And I dare say plenty more in want of a wife elsewhere. This cannot be all of the colony staring up at us, can it? Caroline looked at Diana with a hint of excitement. Well, this is it. Yes, this is it, Diana said, and Caroline was pleased to note that she sounded more intrigued than dismayed. Amongst the rest of their friends, Caroline could hear little murmurs of fear, even a few sniffles which she was quite certain were coming from dear little Grace Bates. The poor thing was so young, it was to be expected. Perhaps, if she had been raised a little differently and had allowed herself such emotions, Caroline might have felt the same herself. She had her own fears, of course, but none that would reduce her to tears on that day as she looked down into the unknown. Without any further evidence, the unknown was a safer place than the known had been. Oh, Diana, I wonder if there is a man out there who would accept me for the woman I am. One who would not deny me books and the right to read them, Caroline said, and realized that she sounded every bit as wistful in her wants as dear Julia Darnley did in her own romantic ideals. I wonder the same, is there a man out there who would simply let me work doing what I know? Diana laughed. I think we are looking for the same thing, Caroline. We are both looking for the opportunity to be no more than ourselves. Perhaps we all are, every one of us. She couldn't help but look at the other women. Even if their wants are different, they are equally important to them, are they not? Yes, and now all there is left to do is hope that we will each get what it is we are looking for, even if it is only release from what we have left behind. That is very nicely put, my dear, Caroline said and smiled broadly, pleased to have the ever-sensible Diana by her side. Of course, there was very little chance that the two of them would remain side by side once they had been rowed ashore. They all knew that they would be housed somewhere, but Caroline could not imagine that they would all be together as they had been at the little inn at Gravesend. A part of me wishes that all I wanted in the world was a loving marriage, a happy romance, Caroline said, sounding a little embarrassed, guilty even. Yes, I think it would be an easier thing to find, Diana agreed. But with such ease comes the old control, I suppose. At least if we are honest about what we are looking for from the very beginning, we might find it. Inasmuch as anything can be guaranteed. After all, a man may say one thing before you are married and do quite another once the whole thing is settled. I just wish I had a better view of them all, Diana. But honestly, the only man in this world I trust is my uncle, Lord Lawton. As for the rest, I can only view them with cynicism. I cannot help but think that they are all capable of the crimes of my father, whatever they might say, however they might present themselves. We are getting maudlin, Caroline. Diana began to laugh. Yes, and it will not do. Just moments ago, I was looking down into the crowd with a feeling of optimism, the idea of a new life. I must not let myself down with little fears and emotions when it is most crucial that I keep them at bay. Caroline nodded firmly, as if to set the thing in stone. Just an hour later saw all the maids for Virginia safely on dry land, some of them seeming to be a little unbalanced. Julia Darnley, in particular, wobbled like a newborn foal, much to the amusement of her friends. Of all of them, Julia had found her sea legs immediately, walking about the ship for the last weeks as if she had found her own patch of terra firma. Now that she was on terra firma, it was as if her legs hardly knew how to manage it. Caroline listened to every bit of the welcome address given by Sir Francis Wyatt. It was interesting that he noted that the women were to be thought of as guests, not unpaid workers, not prisoners. It struck Caroline that he was reminding the assorted men, rather than trying to comfort the women. The men, for their part, were nodding furiously throughout, as if to assure the uncertain-looking women all around them of their good characters and fine intentions, of what good marriage prospects they were. Soon after, the little group of friends were all given the details of where they were to be billeted. Caroline had been quietly relieved to discover that she would be no more than a 1-minute walk from her dear friend. Diana was to be housed with a merchant and his wife, whilst Caroline was to reside with an attorney and his sister. So far, so good. At least we will only be a minute apart. That is not so bad, is it? Diana said, as if to bolster her sudden flagging spirits. Precisely, we will see each other tomorrow, I am sure of it, Caroline went on. After all, we are not prisoners, the governor himself has just said so, has he not? Exactly, Diana said, and Caroline was pleased to hear a little something of the woman's old spirit returning. I will make a point of coming to find you, Diana. You may trust me, I will keep my word. Thank you, Diana said as each of them began to struggle with uncharacteristic emotions. Caroline? Diana said in a near whisper. Are you afraid? Yes, I am afraid, Caroline said, whispering also. Afraid, but not terrified. Then I think the time has come for us to go, she said, as a cart drew up alongside them and men began to load their wooden trunks on the back. Have courage, my dear. At least until tomorrow, Caroline said and surprised herself by leaning forward and kissing her friend's cheek. Chapter 7. As Caroline settled into her new surroundings, her fear quickly began to dissolve. Despite the fact that she already knew she would never have chosen Henry Seddon and his pinch-faced sister as friends, they did not make terrifying hosts. Henry Seddon was clearly an ambitious man, informing Caroline before she had even sat down of all his achievements in the new colony. For a woman who was tired, in great need of bathing, and so hungry that she would take a bite out of the man himself if he did not move fast enough, listening to him boast was far from welcome. Yes, my brother has been very successful since we arrived here just a few years ago. He has made quite a name for himself and I don't doubt that he will one day take part in the newly forming government here. He is very well thought of, Miss Lawton. Caroline wished that people would simply be themselves, instead of trying to impress. She realized the situation was a little unusual, for other young ladies of her class had been taken immediately to the governor's accommodation at the fort. But Caroline, knowing that she did not want to put herself back in exactly the same situation she had left, had declined the kindness. Claiming that she wished to be billeted near her friends, she had managed to keep away from the governor's accommodation without causing any offense. Unfortunately, Henry Seddon and his sister had clearly not been expecting a woman of such class, and they were each struggling to cope with it. Still, they had agreed to take her in, and Caroline was, despite it all, entirely grateful. If she had to listen to Henry Seddon boast for a while, that was what she would do. By the time she had finally been released for long enough to bathe, change, and rest a little, Caroline was so hungry that her stomach hurt. She made her way downstairs and into the neat sitting room of the Seddons' house. It was a fine house, rather large, and Caroline thought it one of the better ones that she had seen. Others had been run down, but the Seddon home was neat, wooden, and painted white. "Ah, Miss Lawton," Henry Seddon said, and rose to his feet as any gentleman might. "I trust you're well rested?" "Yes, thank you." Caroline advanced into the room, taking a seat on the little couch that Henry Seddon indicated with a sweep of his arm. "Was the journey very awful, Miss Lawton?" Miss Seddon asked, sitting forward in her own seat a little as if ready for every detail. "In terms of physical comfort, yes, very awful. The most awful circumstances I have lived through, if I am honest. I did not know before, but I suffer from seasickness, and it did not let up for much of the voyage. I hope you will think it is all worth it in the end." Miss Seddon was peering at her, and Caroline could not tell if her words were meant to be kind or cruel. There was something about the young woman which made Caroline suspect that she would often wonder at the exact meaning of the young woman's words. She wondered if she was the sort of person who was pleased to have a woman of a higher class staying with them, for the elevated status it might confirm, but also a little annoyed by that same woman for the simple idea of a more privileged upbringing. "Oh, I am sure of it, Miss Seddon," Caroline said, injecting as much warmth into her words as she could muster. "Well, I dare say you will have plenty of suitors hammering on my door in no time at all," Henry Seddon added, and Caroline stopped herself from wincing. How indelicate he was, but perhaps it was just nerves. "Well, we shall see. I do hope that I will not be a burden to you for very long." "Oh no, you are not a burden at all." Miss Seddon spoke again, and there was something in her tone, something which suggested that she would enjoy the upper hand for as long as she had it. Well, she could enjoy it all she wished. Caroline had lived through worse than this. She had resided under a roof with people who would make Miss Seddon look like a novice in her attempts to upend her. This was nothing, this was easy. "You are very kind, Miss Seddon," Caroline said, doing everything in her power not to smile sarcastically. "And it really is very good of you both to welcome me into your wonderful home." It really was a nice home, and Caroline liked it very much already. It was, of course, a good deal smaller and nowhere near as grand as her father's fine house in Belgravia. But Caroline thought she liked it better for its smaller proportions, for it gave it a cozy feel, despite the fact that her hosts could make almost anybody feel uncomfortable without trying. The sitting room was a large square with a very pretty round rug in the very center. The couches and chairs were nicely upholstered, nothing too elaborate, just a very plain shade of green. It was nice quality, as was the rest of the furniture. There were small mahogany tables and one or two paintings on the walls, all of which Caroline imagined had been shipped over from England when the brother and sister had first left. "Well, we like it," Miss Seddon said a little pettishly, as if she had somehow been insulted. Perhaps she did not believe that Caroline thought their home wonderful, perhaps she thought her simply being superior. But surely, she could see that Caroline, if she truly was a superior sort of woman, would have stayed with the governor himself. "That vase is exquisite, Miss Seddon," Caroline went on undeterred, staring across the room at an empty painted vase. "I dare say it will look more beautiful still when the spring comes, and we have some flowers." "Yes. I dare say." Miss Seddon shifted in her seat, her face seeming more pinched than ever. "I must say, I am quite surprised that you did not stay at the fort. I would much rather be here, Miss Seddon. And my friend, Diana Walton, is just a minute away. She is housed by Mr. Charles Stanton, I believe." "Oh yes, the merchant," Miss Seddon said a little precariously, as if her brother's occupation of attorney held a grandiosity no merchant could hope to possess. Oh dear, what a discontented little woman Miss Seddon was. "I am so relieved that Mr. Stanton's home is not far from here and that I will be able to check up on my friend tomorrow," Caroline said, making it very clear that she was a free agent who did not have to ask permission to leave the house. She was sure that neither Henry Seddon nor his sister would have attempted such a thing, but she felt it important to continue with her determination to be free. Whatever happened in the future, she would not give in to overblown manners and sensibilities now. "How lovely it is that you have a friend, my dear." It might have seemed daunting otherwise to arrive in Jamestown alone. Miss Seddon had softened her tone to something a little kinder, although Caroline knew better than to trust it. "Yes, with more than 50 women on the Warwick, we have all made some very fine friends. We made one or two ourselves on the way out here a few years ago," Henry Seddon added to the conversation. "It draws people together, doesn't it? It is a foul circumstance being on a ship in the middle of nowhere, and I for one shall never forget it." Caroline thought that it would be very much easier to like Henry Seddon than to like his sister. "And you will never forget the friendships you made either," Caroline said sweetly, wishing that they would simply give her something to eat and let her go to bed. "I do feel for you greatly," Miss Seddon began again. "It was hard enough for me, but at least I was with my brother. At least I knew that I was quite safe when I arrived in Jamestown. Well, fortunately, I appear to be quite safe also." Caroline gave a brittle laugh. "Yes, of course." Miss Seddon nodded her head. "But there is the dreadful insecurity of a good suitor, isn't there?" "There is always that, Miss Seddon. At least here, in America, the insecurity is lessened by the right to refuse. In England, we are not so fortunate." "Oh, that is very sad." Miss Seddon's determination to pity her was not, Caroline was sure, coming from a place of true caring. Miss Seddon was likely a pernicious little creature who was forever concerned with her place in things. If she did not have breeding, then at least she had security. If they did not have a large house, at least they had a better house than most. It struck Caroline that the young woman's world was all about comparisons, and that her mood was most visibly affected when she saw herself as comparing favorably. Well, as far as Caroline was concerned, Miss Seddon could spend the rest of her days entertaining herself with her own insecurities. It was neither here nor there to Caroline, a woman who had dealt with the insecurities of her father and brother for as long as she could remember. At least Miss Seddon had no say over the rest of Caroline's life, and for that she was grateful. "You must not feel sorry for me, my dear, for I made my decision quite happily," Caroline said, warning her off just a little. "I'm sure you did, Miss Lawton. Forgive me, I just think it is a great shame that a fine young lady such as yourself was not already safely married. Being safely married is not a simple matter of status in life, I am afraid. In the end, safety means different things to different people." She knew she sounded a little argumentative. "But I thank you for your concern nonetheless. It is very kind of you, Miss Seddon." To see Henry Seddon's warm smile, Caroline knew that she had immediately redeemed herself. "You must still be very tired, Miss Lawton," Henry Seddon said, clearly not insensible of the little atmosphere that was developing between his sister and their guest. "And hungry too. What do you say to a little food?" "Oh yes, that would be very welcome, Mr. Seddon," Caroline said, and could hear the relief in her tone. She really was so very hungry, and the idea of a decent meal after so many weeks of foul-tasting meat felt like heaven to her. "Then I shall have a word with the cook and see about having dinner prepared a little early tonight," he said, and rose to his feet, darting from the room. Caroline, now left entirely alone with Miss Seddon, simply looked at the woman and gave her the sweetest smile she could manage. "Yes, Miss Seddon, I have survived worse than you, my dear." Chapter 8. "You have another visitor, Miss Lawton," Miss Seddon said with a loud and disapproving sniff. "I shall have some tea sent in." The offer was made most begrudgingly. "Thank you, Miss Seddon." Caroline wanted to ask about the visitor before he was shown in, but did not want to feel any further beholden to Nancy Seddon. She'd had enough of the woman already. In the end, the pernicious little gossip told her as much as she needed to know without any prompting at all. "His name is Brent Stamford and he's a farmer." Miss Seddon wrinkled her nose again, something she seemed to do a lot. "Oh, good," Caroline said enthusiastically, not sure if she was truly as enthusiastic as all that. "Be warned, Miss Lawton, that you are by no means the first woman he has called upon," Miss Seddon said a little too gleefully for Caroline's liking. "Oh dear." Caroline shrugged. What did it matter to her when she had the right to say no? "In fact, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he has visited every other lady who came off the ship," Miss Seddon added when it was clear her little barb was having no effect on Caroline at all. "Well, God loves a trier," Caroline said brightly, unable to stop herself teasing the hateful little woman. "You might be impressed by his handsomeness, but the man is full of nonsense, laughing all the time. He really is very tedious." "Still, it is your choice," Miss Seddon finished before flouncing out of the room as if Caroline had done something wrong. She returned a moment later, leaving the man to introduce himself while she marched angrily in the direction of the kitchen to request the tea that she had promised. "Miss Seddon is such a delight, isn't she?" the man said in a deep voice which was low, almost a whisper. "Indeed," Caroline said without commitment. "Well, I am Caroline Lawton," she said, deciding that it would be quicker and quieter if she simply introduced herself. "It's nice to meet you, Miss Lawton," he said and bowed just a little. "And I am Brent Stamford. I have a farm on the other side of Jamestown." "Well, would you care to take a seat, Mr. Stamford?" Caroline said, neglecting to tell him that it was nice to meet him also. Whilst he was every bit as handsome as Miss Seddon had declared him to be, the idea that he might well have tried every other young woman from the good ship Warwick first was actually beginning to trouble her a little now that she wasn't putting on a show for Miss Seddon's benefit. "Well, have you received many visitors, Miss Lawton?" Brent asked, getting straight to the point. "One or two," she said and smiled briefly. "Look, if you've already accepted somebody else, I won't waste your time," he said with a bluntness that she almost admired. "I haven't accepted anybody, Mr. Stamford." Caroline didn't waste her own time by being coy. It was obvious what they were discussing, and she thought they might just as well be blunt as not. "Oh," he said and smiled broadly. "So, you might as well stay for tea at least," Caroline said a little sarcastically. "You are a little direct, Miss Lawton," he said, his smile not fading for a moment. "I believe that is the pot calling the kettle black, is it not?" She returned his smile. "Tell me, have the poor gentlemen who have already visited you got as far as proposing, or did they run away terrified?" He began to laugh. He was an unusual man, cultured in tone, but somewhat rough in manner. Perhaps, Caroline thought, she was truly witnessing the effect that so many years without feminine influence would have upon a man. "They all ran away terrified," Caroline said flatly, thinking that it was all but true. She had been visited twice already and had been so determined to give her credentials as a fine mathematician and budding scientist that she had neither been proposed to, nor had the gentleman in question made a second visit to her. Still, she did what she could not to be dismayed about that. There was no good in mourning the loss of two men who were exactly of the type she would never have wanted to marry in any case. But perhaps it was the idea that they were indicative of male society at large which had laid her a little low. Brent Stamford, on the other hand, was greatly amused, laughing loudly and unguardedly at what he obviously thought was a joke. Deciding not to contradict the man and have him think her rejected and desperate, Caroline joined in the laughter. As Mr. Stamford made himself more comfortable in his chair and continued to laugh, Caroline took the opportunity to look at him more closely. He was some years older than Caroline, being somewhere between 30 and 32 years. He had tanned skin and roughened hands, the mark of a man who worked outdoors. But his speech marked him out as a man of good middle class, and she suspected that he would likely have been a gentleman farmer back in England. Still, he might be a gentleman or otherwise. She did not care as long as she was accepted for who she was. His hair was dark blonde, which was turning a little ash-colored at the temples. He had pale blue eyes which looked well against his tanned skin, and a very handsome face indeed. He was a tall man and broad, every bit the farmer, although the clothes he had chosen to wear on that day would not instantly have given him away. He wore dark brown breeches and boots with a long beige waistcoat and a dark brown frock coat. "I thought I would bring the tea in myself." Miss Seddon burst suddenly into the room carrying a tray. "My maid is rather busy," she said, as if she fully expected her explanation to be believed. However, Caroline could see the tray held 3 cups and saucers, and that she fully expected to join them for the rest of Mr. Stamford's visit. "Oh, that is kind of you, Miss Seddon," Caroline said flatly. "But you must not go to any more trouble. I shall pour it for Mr. Stamford and myself when it is brewed." She saw the look of annoyance instantly. Without another word, Nancy Seddon marched out of the room. "You certainly have a way with her, Miss Lawton." It seemed that Brent was amused once again. "You have a charm that I can hardly put into words." "Likewise," she said, staring at him flatly. "No, don't glare at me with those sparkling blue eyes, Miss Lawton. You were the one who wanted me all to yourself," he said, and leaned forward to tap the extra cup which Miss Seddon had put on the tray. "Nothing of the kind, Mr. Stamford. I simply wanted Miss Seddon to go away." "You certainly know how to make a fellow feel wanted." He was smiling so broadly that Caroline could not work him out at all. While she hadn't particularly meant to be rude to him, she realized that she had nonetheless. Surely, any other man would simply have got up and walked out by now. Brent was most unusual, at least unusual in terms of Caroline's rather limited knowledge of men. "This is not going particularly well, Mr. Stamford," Caroline said, rising to her feet and indicating that he ought to do the same. "But I thank you for calling to see me. It was most kind of you." He rose to his feet, still smiling but looking a little disappointed. "Ah, so I am not even going to get as far as taking to my heels and running away from you. I am to be ejected." He was standing in front of her and was so tall and broad that she felt quite tiny, even though she was far from it. "You will thank me later, Mr. Stamford. After all, I am simply sparing either of us any further embarrassment." Caroline walked past him out of the room, hoping that he would follow her to the door so that she could show him out. He followed as she had hoped, and when she opened the door, he stepped out. He turned to look at her, still smiling. "You needn't think I'm giving up just yet, Miss Lawton." "I believe you," Caroline said sarcastically. "After all, I am the last lady left to try, am I not?" she said, and gently closed the door. Chapter 9. The following day, Miss Seddon was still smarting from Caroline's rebuff of the afternoon before. She hardly spoke a word to Caroline all day, eating her breakfast in silence and keeping her eyes fixed firmly on the plate in front of her. Miss Seddon was of the rather passive breed of punisher, choosing silent ostracization as her weapon of choice. However, Caroline was in no mood to put up with it. If she allowed Miss Seddon to manipulate her in such a way, she was worried that a habit would form. Caroline remembered her determination to start as she meant to go on, and so decided, in the end, to confront Miss Seddon with her own silence. "You are very quiet this morning, Miss Seddon," she began when she had finished her own breakfast and remained at the table drinking tea. "I am not much in the mood for conversation, Miss Lawton," she responded waspishly. "Well, perhaps not, but you must at least allow me to thank you for such a fine breakfast. Again, I am very grateful that your brother has agreed to let me stay here for a while. Perhaps it will be quite a while, Miss Lawton, if you turn your nose up at every man who comes in here." "Is that why you are so annoyed with me, my dear?" Caroline said, choosing bluntness once again. "Annoyed? No, I'm not annoyed," she went on defensively. "Let us at least be honest with each other, Miss Seddon. You are clearly annoyed with me. You have uttered not 2 words to me all morning. I think you are perfectly well aware that I had 3 cups set out on that tray yesterday." Finally, the rout of Nancy Seddon's annoyance. "Yes, I did see. But how am I to get to know much of a man's character if I cannot speak to him quite openly?" Caroline said without showing her own annoyance at all. "I would think a lady of your breeding would be very careful about gossip and such the like. I do not think it is fitting for a man and a woman to be left alone. If there was any gossip at all, my dear, it could only come from one place, could it not?" Caroline said, hearing the accusation in her voice. "And really, I was in your sitting room with the door open. To suggest that anything untoward would take place is a little insulting. I didn't mean to give any offense, I'm sure." Miss Seddon backed down a little in light of her guest's strident tone. "No, I am sure you did not. But I am also sure you understand the need for me to make the right choice. I must be able to speak to a gentleman properly, without the constraint of extraneous company, in order to decide whether or not his character is good. I understand, of course, the way that English morality clings to a person, even when they have moved so many thousands of miles away, but it hardly works in my particular circumstance, does it? After all, the marriage market here, as it were, is so very much more blatant and obvious, even if it is no different in essence than it is in England. It is not the same in England. For a woman of my class, Miss Seddon, I can assure you that it is. I had no say whatsoever in England, that is the difference. In England, my father would have been doing the interviewing, whereas here I can do that for myself." Caroline kept her tone as friendly as she could manage. "I am sure you know well that I am, to all intents and purposes, for sale for the princely sum of £150 in weight of good tobacco. Unseemly, is it not? But in England, I would still be sold, given away by my father to whomever would accept his terms and do him the most service. As I said, in essence, it is no different. What a strange thing to hear a fine lady discuss herself being sold in such a manner. And now the air of having the upper hand was back. There are certain hands in life that we are dealt and have no hope of changing, my dear. You might even find the same applies to you one day in some circumstance or other. I suppose it is easy to judge in the meantime." "I'm not judging, I'm just observing." Miss Seddon was defensive, but Caroline could see that she knew she was being judgmental. "Despite the hand I have been dealt, Miss Seddon, I intend to turn it to my best advantage. That is why I will not agree to marry the first man who asks me unless I am absolutely certain that he has the character I am seeking. Not my father, not the Virginia Company, me." She spoke the last so firmly that Miss Seddon's eyes widened. "I must say that is very sensible, Miss Lawton." Despite the fact that Miss Seddon had taken on the appearance of a frightened rabbit, Caroline knew that she would, sooner or later, return to her former self. "Thank you," Caroline said, and smiled sweetly. Not an hour later, Caroline received another visitor. This time, however, Miss Seddon did not attempt to insert herself in any way and had the maid bring them tea instead. Caroline smiled to herself. The woman spent her entire life trying to make a point, it would seem. "I am very pleased to meet you, Miss Lawton." Edgar Gainsborough smiled at her in a rather appraising way. "Although I am bound to say that I am surprised that you are not housed with the governor. I preferred to be in Jamestown itself, Mr. Gainsborough, rather than tucked away in the fort," Caroline said and smiled. Edgar Gainsborough was clearly a man of her own status, his cultured tone so clipped and determined, announcing his place in the world. Caroline noted that, far from being comforting to find somebody of her own class in her company, she was a little stifled by it. He reminded her too much of home and her father and brother. He was a type, and he conformed to it perfectly. But really, it is not at all fitting. Much better you spend these next few days or weeks in the governor's accommodation. You must leave it with me, Miss Lawton. I will speak to Sir Francis myself. There is no need, Mr. Gainsborough, she said, already feeling annoyed. Edgar Gainsborough was certainly handsome enough, although his aristocratic air made him somewhat too effeminate for her taste. Caroline almost laughed. She hardly knew she had a taste in men at all beyond the idea that she needed them to accept her as she was. Almost unwillingly, she compared him to Brent Stamford. The two men were so far apart that there was almost bright daylight between them. She had to admit, however, that she altogether preferred the look and bearing of the gentleman farmer. Mr. Stamford was a little taller and a good deal broader than Edgar Gainsborough, and his tanned skin made him look very much healthier. Edgar, on the other hand, was rather a pasty man, as if he kept out of the sunshine altogether. "Not at all, I will see to it this afternoon." "I would rather you did not, Mr. Gainsborough. It would be much better if a fine lady like you, Miss Lawton, were kept out of harm's way," he persisted, and she could feel her annoyance growing. "I think I would much rather be in harm's way, if it is all the same to you, Mr. Gainsborough," Caroline said bluntly, enjoying the freedom that the power of the word no was finally giving her. "I do believe it will be much less tedious." "You are teasing me, surely?" "No, I am not teasing you, Mr. Gainsborough. I would much prefer to stay here, and so here I shall stay." She smiled, barely taking the edge of her assertiveness. "But I could not help detect you do not seem to like Miss Seddon at all." "I do not like Miss Seddon, but still, I intend to stay here," she said, realizing that the stomach-wrenching sea voyage and all the life that had gone on around her ever since, had somehow made her forget just how persistent and patronizing the men of her own class truly were. "Well, when you change your mind, you need only ask me, and I will deal with it," he said solemnly, and Caroline noticed his use of the word when, instead of if. She reached for her tea, drinking it down scalding hot as if to hurry this dreadful little meeting to its conclusion. Caroline wished that Edgar Gainsborough would simply ask her outright to marry him so that she could roundly reject him. He reached for his tea also, wincing as the hot fluid burned his lips before hurriedly putting it down again. How very different he was from Brent. She could quite imagine Brent either laughing and refusing to drink it or drinking it down scalding hot and beating her at her own game. As annoying as he was, at least Brent was not part of the tedious upper classes. I dare say you would be keen to hear me confirm the list of my skills, Mr. Gainsborough. Not at all, that will not be necessary. My dear woman, I have not even read them, he said and smiled, clearly pleased that she was moving things along a little and entirely misunderstanding the whole thing. But if you have not read my list of skills, sir, how could you possibly know that I would be at all suitable for your establishment? She said in a tone which was all business. You are the niece of Lord Lawton, are you not? You do not need to have any skills, none at all. I am sure that you are well accomplished in all manner of wonderful things, Miss Lawton, but you do not need any particular skills. He smiled at her reassuringly, and Caroline wanted to lift the teapot and tip the rest of its scalding contents into his lap. Well, perhaps I ought to tell them to you anyway, Caroline said firmly. The Virginia Company were most determined to have me write them down. She shrugged amiably. I shall begin with my strengths. You really do not need to, he said, but she cut him off. I am a student of mathematics and have a great interest in the extensive works of Euclid, she said, smiling fully when she saw the look of surprise on his face. Prior to leaving England, I was studying his work data, which concerns the implications of given information in geometric problems. It does, of course, form part of the first 4 books of his work Elements, and I am enthralled by it. Or at least I was before my father burned it. I see, Edgar said cautiously. Well, perhaps it was for the best. Perhaps what was for the best, Mr. Gainsborough? Caroline asked with an air of innocence that was entirely feigned. It is hardly suitable reading material for a young lady. I dare say your father was only doing what he thought was best for you, he said, his patronizing air in full force once again. Goodness, you make Euclid sound like Satan, she said with an irreverent laugh. How on earth is it not suitable reading material? Learning is learning, is it not? I hardly think that you will have a need for such things in my house. And I hardly think that I will be in your house, sir, Caroline said in a gently rejecting tone. I have all the other skills, of course, sewing, novel reading, a little sketching. I dare say those are things that you would prefer, I know. For your own sake, would say so, he said and seemed a little angry. How is it for my own sake? How is it of any benefit to me to turn my back on my intelligence? I ask only out of curiosity, Mr. Gainsborough, because I cannot help but think it would be for your sake. Perhaps it is a good thing after all that you are not housed with the governor, Miss Lawton. You may not have turned your back on intelligence, but you have certainly turned your back on your breeding. You are choosing to insult me, sir, when I have not done the same to you. As a gentleman, have you not just turned your back on your breeding? It will not do you any good to think yourself so clever, Miss Lawton. I do not think myself to be clever, Mr. Gainsborough. I know myself to be clever. I believe I have made a very grave mistake in coming here today, he said, his pale cheeks now scarlet with anger as he rose to his feet. Well, as you wish, Caroline said with a sweet smile as she rose to her feet. But I must thank you for calling upon me today. It has been most informative, she said and walked primly to the door, safe in the knowledge that he would never return. Chapter 10. Oh, you did not. Diana shrieked with laughter. The two were alone in the merchant warehouse that Diana's new husband owned. Caroline had walked out to see her friend who had married just a week before and had already made a place for herself in her husband's business. I did. And you should have seen his face. Caroline whispered, hoping that Mr. Arnold Price, Diana's aging husband, would not hear them. She had thoroughly enjoyed recounting every detail of Edgar Gainsborough's visit the week before. How she had missed seeing Diana every day, although she did not miss the sway and odors of the high seas. At least you stopped him asking you to marry him, you halted his proposal in its tracks. Yes, I managed that at least. And in the entire week, I have received no further visits from tiresome men of class who would seek to behave no differently than my father. Really, can you believe that Mr. Gainsborough said that it was probably for the best that my father had burned my books? As if that would make me think him a suitable husband for me. The problem is that not everybody listens. If he had listened properly, Mr. Gainsborough would have realized how much the books had meant to you. But that is the arrogance in him, I suppose, Diana said thoughtfully, turning a piece of thin leather over and over in her hands. What are you doing with that? Caroline asked out of interest. It is a little piece of leather that my husband gave me so that I might attempt to design a more suitable hat for the men of Jamestown. Something that will keep the rain and the sun off and be far more suitable than the rather pompous-looking tricorn hats. You are going to design a hat? Goodness, how wonderful! Caroline said, and meant it. Well, I am a milliner. Diana laughed. But it is wonderful. Arnold is so kind and he is pleased to have me carry on a little of my old business here in his warehouse. I could not have hoped for better, Caroline. It is a wonderful thing to be able to contribute to the world, Diana. Just imagine, what a sight to see men all over the colony wearing the very hat that you designed. You are kind, Caroline, but it is hardly as clever a thing as reading mathematics, Diana said a little shyly. It does not matter what it is, when a person achieves their heart's wish, that is the greatest achievement of them all. It is freedom, Diana, Caroline said, wondering if she would ever have the same thing herself. How are things with Miss Seddon? Diana said, changing the subject. I would gladly have my freedom from that horrid little creature, but I have yet to find a man who would not only marry me but allow me to continue that little freedom. You must not give up hope. Diana uncharacteristically reached across the counter and squeezed Caroline's hand. Although, you might not find somebody like Edgar Gainsborough again. That is a good thing, Caroline said and laughed, enjoying the ease of leaning against the counter in Arnold Price's warehouse. It felt somewhat unladylike and amusing. Arnold Price was a wealthy enough merchant, and his house was very pleasant. Caroline had been a welcome visitor more than once and always found that she did not want to leave. He kept only 2 servants, a maid and a houseman, but it certainly seemed to be enough. Caroline knew that she would be perfectly happy to live in such a house, something so very different from all she had known before. If a person kept things simple, they did not need an army of servants to attend to their every whim, and she quite liked the idea of seeing to herself. She had begun to go out into the kitchen at the Seddon house and make tea for herself on occasion. She would never have been able to do such a thing back home in England, and so she felt she was justified in adding it to her little list of curious achievements. The maid had been taken aback, of course, but Caroline had kept at it, and the maid had very quickly grown used to it. In truth, Caroline thought the maid much preferred her to her mistress, and it gave her a somewhat childish sense of pleasure. I don't suppose I mean a man exactly like Edgar Gainsborough, but a man of his class. Of your class, Diana said almost apologetically. My own class is very stifling, Diana. My own class is the very reason that I chose not to be housed with Sir Francis Wyatt. There is a constriction in my class in everything from speech to behavior, and the end result is, I believe, control. Edgar Gainsborough represents those of his status rather well. No, I would be happy to live in very different surroundings, such things hold no value for me. You really are different, Caroline. Not just in your learning and what have you, but in everything. Most ladies in your position would simply take advantage of the privileges. Only because they are too afraid to turn them down. Those privileges, you see, come hand in hand with a complete lack of freedom. I know that women of all classes can suffer similarly, but the boredom of not being allowed to contribute to the world in any way is almost suffocating to me. Perhaps I ought to teach you how to make a hat, Caroline, Diana said with a smile, still turning the thin piece of leather over and over on the counter. Oh, what a wonderful idea. Imagine everything that Miss Seddon would find to disapprove of in that. Caroline laughed. Is she speaking to you again after you barred her from taking tea with you and Mr. Stamford? She was, but I believe we are at odds once again. Caroline shook her head, still smiling. She is a curious person, although I do not think her unique. She is quietly furious with me for turning away Edgar Gainsborough, for he is a man of superior class in her opinion. The truth is that she despises me for being of that same class. It is a very confusing thing. She is one moment deferential and the next downright insulting. She has struggles of her own, all of them internal. What business is it of hers who you choose to reject? Diana said simply. Indeed. Caroline felt that relief of the company of a kindred spirit. This is why we are such good friends, my dear. You see the world very plainly and simply, as do I. It is much easier that way. Diana set the piece of leather down and leaned her elbows on the counter. So, have you heard anything more from Mr. Stamford? Mr. Stamford? No, I hardly think that he will be back again, Caroline said, immediately discarding the little feeling she had that she had liked him best of everybody who had called upon her. Just because she liked him best, did not mean that she entirely liked him. He was simply the best of a rather bad bunch. That seems like a shame, Diana said tentatively. Really? Caroline said, interested to know exactly what Diana was thinking. I can't explain it, exactly, but I thought he sounded much more fun than the rest. From what you told me, I formed the impression that he quite enjoyed his little arguments with you. Diana shrugged. But I've never met him, so I could not really say. He's a great friend of the man Constance Dearborn married. Jack Thornton, I believe. Another gentleman farmer, at any rate. Oh, I had not realized, Caroline said, wondering for a fleeting moment if she ought to have been a little kinder to Brent Stamford. Anyway, at least you have been brave and made it clear that you will not be accepting anybody who cannot accept you. You may not think it yet, Caroline, but that is an achievement in itself. Oh, what a wonderful thing to say. Caroline smiled and felt a little flash of emotion which she struggled to swallow down. She knew, of course, she cared a great deal for her friend. The problem was, she wasn't used to being so suddenly waylaid by her own feelings. She remained quiet for a moment or two, steadying herself until she had returned to normal. Well, I dare say I ought to leave you to get on with your hat design, Caroline said brightly when she had recovered herself completely. But I will see you next week, won't I? Diana said. Yes, of course you will. You might even see me sooner, if I am on the run from Miss Seddon. Chapter 11. Some days later saw the return of none other than Mr. Brent Stamford. When he was shown unceremoniously into the sitting room by Miss Seddon, Caroline's mouth fell open a little. You are surprised to see me, I can tell, he said with that amused confidence that Caroline thought bordered on cockiness. Amazed, Mr. Stamford, she said in as flat a tone as she could manage. But however flat her tone, Caroline realized that she was a little pleased to see him. Perhaps not pleased, exactly, but certainly amused. If nothing else, Mr. Stamford was about to break up the monotony of an otherwise very boring day. Would you like me to leave? He asked, hovering by one of the armchairs as if his comfort depended on her answer. No, it has been a very quiet morning, she said truthfully. Oh, so you would keep me here to spare you from boredom? He was immediately teasing her, and she wondered to herself if this was how he went about every day of his life. More or less, Mr. Stamford, she said, her tone just a little less flat as she waved him into his seat. I am surprised that a learned young woman such as yourself is ever bored, Miss Lawton. Ah, I see there must be a little gossip floating about the colony, she said, knowing immediately that he was alluding to her angry conversation with Edgar Gainsborough. There is not much else to do by way of entertainment. He shrugged. So, tell me, why is it that you are bored? I would expect to see you with a book on your lap. I would have a book on my lap, sir, if there was anything in this house worth reading, she said in a whisper as she cast her eyes guiltily over to the partially open sitting-room door. Can you find nothing to your taste? I suppose I slightly prefer Mr. Sutton's choice of picaresque adventure tales to the rather dull poetry and prose that Miss Seddon favors, she said, suddenly not at all bothered if her hostess was listening on the other side of the door. After all, if she was choosing to eavesdrop, she deserved to hear the worst. Very tedious, I dare say, he said as he rose to his feet and silently walked across the room. Caroline watched him with interest, wondering what on earth he was doing. But when he reached the partially open sitting-room door and gave it a light shove, she almost laughed out loud. He had suspected Miss Seddon of listening in just as much as she had, only he had chosen to do something about it. There was nobody on the other side of the door, and Caroline was suitably relieved. She'd had enough of Miss Seddon's moods to last her a lifetime. A good job she was not there, I suppose, for the door would likely have struck her hard on the forehead. He shrugged, and Caroline could not help but laugh. You wicked woman, I can see that the idea pleases you. I am afraid it does, Mr. Stamford. You are an unusual lady, are you not? Has anybody told you? Nobody ever seems to tell me anything else, Mr. Stamford. Caroline was pleased that her laughter had died down and her cut-glass tone had returned. You have the entire colony wondering about Euclid. He chuckled. Surely they know who Euclid was. Like most with an education, they know who he was. But also, like most with education, they never understood it all. And you? I have just described myself perfectly. My tutor forced it on me in a vague sort of way, but when he realized that I had no talent for it, he did not waste too much of his own time persisting. I shall not apologize for being a clever woman, Mr. Stamford. And I shall try not to hold that against you, my dear. He chuckled and she could hardly tell his own true thoughts on the matter. He had come back to her despite having heard the gossip of how she had sent Edgar Gainsborough away with a flea in his ear. But had he come back to her because he wanted to taunt her and get a little revenge for the way she had treated him the first time, or did her level of education not upset him as it undoubtedly did others? She would have asked him outright, but Caroline had a great sense that she would be giving this overly confident man the upper hand in some way. Would you like to come over to the other side of Jamestown one afternoon and have a look at my farm? He asked, and grinned at her in a most annoying way. Caroline couldn't work out exactly what it was she felt for this man. He was not unpleasant, but she was not entirely sure he was pleasant either. He laughed a good deal of the time and she thought that much of it was at her expense. So that I will marry you? Caroline said sharply. No, I am building a new cattle shed and would like some advice on the best angle for the roof, he said, not laughing this time, but raising his eyebrows in a manner which suggested he was greatly amused. I see that you are mocking me, Mr. Stamford. Not entirely, he said, and his expression was so amiable that Caroline was struggling to take offense. If she took his words at face value, Caroline would be well within her rights to get to her feet and demand that he leave. But everything was delivered so affably that she could not tell if he meant it or not. "Have it your own way, Mr. Stamford. You may mock me if you wish, I do not care." Caroline knew she sounded a little petulant. "I can see that it is already time for me to go again, Miss Lawton. Perhaps I am learning, for I have recognized it before it becomes necessary for you to eject me again." He was grinning, his face quite annoyingly handsome. "Shall I show myself to the door?" "No, I would be perfectly happy to show you to the door, Mr. Stamford. In fact, I should be only too glad to do it." She did not disguise the heavy sarcasm in her voice. "You never disappoint, do you?" "I hardly know what you mean." "Never mind, I shall leave you alone." He made his way out to the front door with Caroline following along behind him. "With me out of the way, my dear, you will be able to dispense with the boring prose and poetry and unpack Euclid. I'm sure you will find him far more suitable company than I am. You will be pleased to know that I no longer have any texts in my possession. My father saw fit to burn them all. I am surprised that you did not hear about it when your ears were open to all the other gossip," she said, feeling annoyed but not sure if it was the remembrance of her father burning her books or Mr. Stamford doing everything in his power to annoy her. "No, I had not heard that," he said, his face suddenly serious for once. "And no, Miss Lawton, I am not pleased to hear it." "It gives me no pleasure at all," he said and nodded his farewells very simply before turning to step out through the open doorway and stride away from her. Chapter 12. Some days later, Brent left his workers to manage the farm so that he might ride over to see Jack Thornton. They generally perched on the steps of Jack's farmhouse and peered out over his land as they put the world to rights and enjoyed a little humor between men. He was pleased to note that, even though Jack had been thoroughly successful in his quest for a wife, he did not turn his back on his old friend. Indeed, he was as pleased to see him as ever he had been. The two men had become firm friends in the long and dreadful weeks of their own crossing from England to America some years before. They had maintained contact upon arrival in Jamestown, developing their farms at the same time and having much in common. "A good day, Brent?" Jack, striding out of the stables where he had just set out some oats for his horse, smiled warmly. "Yes, spring is on its way and there is much to do. I like the industry of the last weeks of winter, trying to get ahead of things and prepare the soil and what have you." The two men walked side by side until they reached the steps of the farmhouse. "I hope I will not be getting in the way of things?" he added, peering over his shoulder towards the house itself. "No, Constance will not be expecting me yet." He shrugged. "If she expects me at all. You must have faith, my dear fellow. There is a sadness to her, but that will go. She's young and everything has happened so quickly. But believe me, you have made a very good choice and one day Constance will realize that she has also. Now there you have raised my spirits." Jack laughed, and the two men finally sat down on the steps. "But how about you? Are you still smarting from your last visit to Her Royal Highness?" "She's not like that, Jack." Brent realized how defensive he sounded. "At least she is not typical of her class. That is not to say that she is not hard-working in her own way, but it is not a life of privilege that makes her so." "No, I'm afraid you're going to have to explain, Brent. I can truthfully say I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." Jack hooted like a goose. "As far as I can see, it is not a man's wealth and status which interests her." "Then what is it?" "I can hardly say, for I am not entirely sure it is the idea of romance either. But there must be something which will sway her." I do not think it is possible to sway the opinion of Miss Caroline Lawton. Then why do you persist, Brent? There are still other ladies from the Warwick who are not yet married. Yes, but I've visited most of them already, haven't I? Brent chuckled and stared vacantly off into the distance, noting the tufts of green grass and the winter crocuses. It was still winter, but the crocuses reminded him of spring. Perhaps a little warmth and sunshine would do wonders for Miss Lawton's apparently cool character. Yes, but the ones who are not yet married might be ready to welcome a second visit. They might well commit more if you try to be a little less rough and manly in your humor. These are not wenches serving ale at an inn, Brent, they are reasonably bred women. It is no good, I now prefer Miss Lawton to any of them. In truth, the only reason I did not visit her sooner was because of her class, I suppose. I had imagined her to be exactly like the fine ladies housed with the governor, and it was only my curiosity as to why she did not reside at the fort that led me to her in the first place. But I very nearly did not go, thinking I would no more visit her than I would one of the ladies staying with Sir Francis. Things are supposed to be different here, Brent. I am not so sure that everybody will be so keen to know their place in the future. I know there are those who would cling on to it, they will always exist. There is a chance now, isn't there, for something different? I would hope so, Jack, but I am not as optimistic as you, I must admit. This Miss Lawton of yours sounds a little different if she has chosen not to stay with the governor. Or perhaps she is not different, exactly, but just a little odd. Jack chuckled wickedly and leaned his elbows on the step above, lounging somewhat languidly. I think she is a little of both. Brent stared out toward the horizon where the sun was low in the sky, slowly slipping down behind the hills in the distance. Caroline Lawton was certainly different, never a truer word had been spoken. The only problem was, Brent did not know if her difference would be any good to him in the end. She gave every appearance of annoyance each time she saw him, although he wondered if a young lady such as Caroline used her countenance as a shield. Not for the first time, Brent found his mind filling with an image of her shining thick black hair, her startlingly blue eyes, and her pale skin. She was tall for a woman and far more curvy than wretched, that was the truth. All in all, she was very beautiful indeed, and her beauty had made him inattentive in his work for several days together. She was clever, no two ways about it, and she had such a fiery retort for every teasing word he uttered that he found himself mesmerized. She was quick-witted, and Brent liked that very much indeed. There was also a bluntness to her, as if she had determined not to be as light and inconsequential as her peers. He liked that too. And the idea that she had so easily dismissed a puffed-up blowhard like Edgar Gainsborough went even further in her favor, as far as he was concerned. It was both amusing and courageous, and, on hearing the entire tale, he found his very reason to make a second visit. Although his first visit had not gone well, he had enjoyed it greatly. He had got under her skin just enough to have her round on him, and it had been a most enjoyable experience. If he had ever known a woman like that in his life before, Brent would have suffered much more in the earlier, lonelier years of the colony. It was only the idea that women were largely the same which had helped him to manage the lack of them. So, how are you going to win the heart of this young woman if her heart has already been stolen by Euclid? Jack asked, clearly amused by the whole thing. Well, he's an easy enough man to fight off since she no longer has any of the relevant texts. Brent had been about to laugh, but the memory of how he had felt when she told him how her books had been so cruelly disposed of stopped him in his tracks. Brent? Jack turned on the step and raised his eyebrows in question. Is everything all right, my dear fellow? Do you know, Miss Lawton's father burned her books? That sounds rather harsh. Yes, I think so too. Why did he burn her books? Probably because they were proof that she was cleverer than him. Brent shrugged. Whatever it was cruel. She might be unusual, and her interests more unusual still, but does she not have the right to have them? I dare say the lady herself would be very pleased to hear you say that, Jack said thoughtfully. After all, if her father burned her books to stop her learning, she probably rightly imagines that most other men would do the same. Can you imagine Edgar Gainsborough sitting down to read whilst his wife attended to her own intellectual development? Jack chuckled. No, I cannot. Then you are going to have to work rather hard to win this young lady's trust, I believe. I think it is a simple thing to see what makes her a little prickly. Really, you see it so clearly? Brent peered at his friend intently. And what makes you suddenly so clever about the whole thing? Just the fact that her father burned her books. If you had told me that sooner, I would have come to my conclusion sooner. If that is what is important to her and it was taken away, then perhaps you ought to find a way to convince her that you would never do such a thing. Of course, I would never burn her books. Not now, she does not have any, Jack said in an amusingly argumentative fashion. No, she does not, Brent said thoughtfully. I say, I think you have just given me a splendid idea. Well, if it works, I shall take full credit for it. It will be some weeks before I can say it has worked or you can assume credit. Brent grinned. At least as long as it takes for the supply ship to get here. Perhaps, in the end, all Brent really needed to appeal to Caroline Lawton was a little time and patience, not to mention a book or two. Chapter 13. 28 Sup R equals X low th/sup February 1622. I have been here in Henry Seddon's home since the middle of December and I am growing very tired of it. My determination to see Miss Seddon as nothing more than a minor irritation is beginning to fall by the wayside as I fear she grinds me down bit by bit. It is true that she is no match for my father in her ability to torment me, but I am tired of it, nonetheless. She is excessively inquisitive and horribly judgmental at all times, having nothing at all in her character or appearance which would draw anybody to her. Perhaps that is, in part, an explanation for some of her bitterness. The poor thing has been here for some years, a single woman without, as far as I can tell, a proposal of marriage to her name. She has been like water in the desert, and yet nobody has reached out to take a drink. Perhaps even men who have been alone for so long would not risk attempting to assuage their loneliness with such an unpleasant young woman. After all, life is too long to make such a mistake, is it not? And with that in mind, I turn to thoughts of myself. I have been true to my own heart and have not accepted a single proposal, given that they have all been made by men who think nothing of my own merits. They have largely been of a type, generally of the upper class or extraordinarily wealthy middle classes. And there the similarities do not end, for they all have made it very clear that I would not need a skill, a true skill, to my name. My only skill is that I am Lord Lawton's niece, nothing more. Of course, no man of such class has made any approach to the Seddon house since I dispatched Edgar Gainsborough. Word travels rather quickly of my prickly nature and propensity towards a rather masculine set of pursuits, or at least that is how I have heard them described. I do not think my pursuits at all masculine, nor do I think myself to be the same. In fact, I find mathematics and science so elegant that it is almost feminine. But the truth is that the laws of mathematics, physics, and nature are neither masculine or feminine. They exist outside ideas of sex and suitability, and that is what makes them so beautifully appealing. But I am digressing into the known. Perhaps it is time for me to set down on paper all that has happened in the realm of the unknown. I speak, of course, of the tenacious Mr. Brent Stamford. How I wish I could get to the bottoms of that man's character, then I could decide whether to embrace him or dismiss him. His humor is a little alien to me, although I think I am beginning to enjoy it for all its silliness. He is very different in nature to myself, of course, for I am as serious as he is not. But if I think about it in terms of polarity, then I find a curious comfort in the proven idea that opposites attract. Of course, that describes only positive and negative poles. I have no idea if magnetism between human beings works in the same way. Once again, the curious Mr. Stamford has called on me. If I am honest, I had not expected to see him here again after our last meeting, and yet he persists. I wish I knew if his interest was genuine or if he is simply finding a way to entertain himself until the next ship carrying young women from England arrives. And since I can be honest within the confines of my own diary, I shall willingly admit that Miss Seddon's words of some weeks ago suggesting that Mr. Stamford had tried to appeal to every other young lady first still irk me in some way. I am irked, of course, because Miss Seddon is such a spiteful young woman. But it irks me to be at the bottom of a long list, however much I declare that romance is not something I am at all interested in. I realize this is pride, for it can be nothing else, and yet even my own recognition of it seems to do nothing to assuage it. But still he came, knocking loudly at the front door as always. Being only in the sitting room and already on my feet, I decided to answer the door for myself. Miss Seddon was out ordering provisions in Jamestown, and so I held my hand out to stop the maid in her tracks so that I might receive the guest myself. We meet again, Miss Lawton. When I opened the door, none other than Brent Stamford himself was smiling down at me. I suppose that is a consequence of your knocking on the door in the first place, Mr. Stamford, I said, hearing my waspish tone and wondering why it was I could not simply be unreservedly pleasant to the man. Whenever I am in his company, I feel as if I am in combat. The truth is, I do not find that combat entirely unpleasing, for it makes me feel a little alive. I have never had such conversations with any man, certainly not in England, and I find the departure from rigid manners quite refreshing. As I have said before, you never disappoint, Miss Lawton. And as I said before, I have no idea what you mean. I always know to expect a less than warm welcome from you, he said and then smiled a little apologetically. Although the witty badinage is most enjoyable. You have a curious sense of pleasure, Mr. Stamford, I said to him, despite the fact that I had thought the very same thing myself. More and more, Mr. Stamford looks handsome to me. His tan skin and pale blue eyes really are a draw, and when he smiles, his teeth are very straight and white. It is a most appealing smile. Still, there is always an edge to that smile, for it generally rides along on the back of his having found some clever way to irritate me. Says the woman who is missing Euclid. He grinned at me and I could not help but laugh. Yes, despite all my instincts and determination to remain aloof, I laughed. I suppose you have come here looking for tea and an opportunity to irritate me, Mr. Stamford, I said and realized that I had come to hope that he had. No, I really have no intention of coming in today. Oh. Is that a look of disappointment on your face, Miss Lawton, or is it simply your customary blank dissatisfaction? Blank dissatisfaction? I shall openly admit that his words really did anger me. Clearly, you had come to the door simply to. I could not even finish for he had begun to speak again. Oh, put your offense away for a moment, would you? I have come here to see if you would care to take a little walk with me. A walk? With you? I said, riding high on my own haughtiness. It is either that or suffer the dreadful company of Miss Seddon, for I have seen her in Jamestown and am certain that she will be returning home any minute. I suffer Miss Seddon's company day in day out, Mr. Stamford. I need no rescuing. Ah, But has she yet delivered to you the news that you are among only 7 ladies who stepped off the good ship Warwick who remain unmarried?" he said, and his smile was broad and victorious. "What?" I said, dumbfounded. "Yes, one of only 7 remaining spinsters in the colony. 8, if you count that hateful little shrew," I said viciously, letting myself down a little. However, Mr. Stamford was greatly amused by it, seeming pleased that my mask of self-possession had slipped and allowed my barefaced anger through. "That's the spirit," he said, chuckling in a way which made me want to reach out and pinch his arm. "Oh, forgive me," I said, feeling the weight of my old upbringing and manners heavy upon me. "No, no forgiveness is required. Now, I have not enjoyed anything as much as that for a very long time, my dear." "So, Miss Seddon saw fit to tell you that I am only one of 7 of the maids from England who remains unmarried? She really is the most vicious little woman." Despite my annoyance, I have to admit that I was a little hurt by it all. Although Miss Seddon and I have never been particularly friendly towards one another, I certainly tried my best in the beginning. Furthermore, I am almost alone in this world, and the Seddons had put themselves forward as hosts. Am I really so very unlikable? I agree, she's very vicious indeed, and I have no doubt that she is hurrying back even as we speak with the intention of giving you the very same information that she tripped over her long beak in her haste to tell me. "Then I will walk with you, if the offer still stands?" I said, a little ungraciously. "Of course," he said and smiled. This time, however, it struck me that his smile was not as amused and teasing as it ordinarily was. Perhaps I am simply reading a little too much into things, seeing exactly what it is I think I have started to want to see. Nonetheless, I believe that I saw real pleasure in his expression. Not trusting it, of course, I continued in my customary vein, pulling my woolen shawl down from the hat stand and wrapping it around me, stepping out into the street and striding off, Mr. Stamford hurrying along to catch up with me. "You need not break into a run, Miss Lawton. There is no sign of Miss Seddon just yet," he said, looking back in the opposite direction as if to check that he was correct. "One cannot be too careful. I am too furious to deal with that woman currently and think I must march until the anger has died down." "Well, spare a thought for me, my dear. I am not a youthful man of just 20. Despite his words, Brent Stamford kept up with me easily. "And I am not 20. I said rather foolishly. "I am 21. "Goodness me, 21, he said, and his mocking tone had returned. "If you are going to irritate me, Mr. Stamford, then I shall continue this walk alone. If only I could get a hold of my pride now and again, for I am certain that it will one day be the end of me. I shall keep quiet. Here, take my arm," he said, thrusting his elbow towards me. I stopped dead where I was as if I had never seen such a thing in my life. Really, I can be very foolish at times, but I suppose I am not yet ready to give any leeway to Mr. Brent Stamford. "Why? Do you suspect that my balance is not all it could be? Trust me, Mr. Stamford, I have neither an infection of the ear nor am I drunk. I am perfectly well able to stand and walk unaided, see?" I said and held my arms out to the side to demonstrate. "I do not sway, do I?" "My word, you are a wasp," he said, a good deal of exasperation mixed in with his amusement. "A real wasp. And perhaps I would be better off if you were drunk, Miss Lawton, for I suspect that it might make you nicer." Without another word, I continued on my way, having no retort for his words at all. I had fully expected him to walk in the other direction and was surprised to find, when I looked to the side, that he was still there. And some moments later, I could hear him laughing under his breath. Really, will I ever get to the bottom of Mr. Brent Stamford? Chapter 14. It had been some weeks since Arnold Price, Diana's husband, had passed away from a long-standing illness. He was aging and had spent many years missing his first wife greatly. In many respects, it was a mercy, but Caroline could see how the guilt of it all was beginning to eat away at her friend. "Diana, I do wish you could see how you improved Arnold's life in these last weeks," Caroline said, reaching a hand across the kitchen table to her friend. "You must try to let go of this guilt." "I cannot, I deserve every bit of it. Caroline, you know better than anybody how I plotted and schemed all the way from England to Jamestown. You know that Arnold was a perfect victim for my plan, being aged, unwell, and having his own business. Yes, that was your plan, but that was not how things went between you. You were kind to Arnold, you nursed him yourself through his final illness, and I have seen how you have shed tears for the loss of him. Yes, I have shed tears, for I'm very sad indeed. I did not love him as a wife loves a husband, he never expected it. But I did love him, Caroline. I know, I could see as much myself. But I should have considered love long before, shouldn't I?" "What do you mean?" Caroline said, feeling a little confused. "It counts, Caroline. It means something." "I see," Caroline said, wondering if she really did see after all. "We had it wrong, Caroline." "We had it all wrong," Diana said miserably, tears welling in her big round eyes. "Diana, it can never be wrong to want things for yourself. Not material things, but the right to simply be. That was all you wanted, I could see it all along. You did not want anything more than the right to use your skills and contribute, to help to support yourself. You must not let guilt cloud the way things truly were. Forgive me, I know that you will find this line of conversation most disconcerting, but it is how I feel. I did not consider love properly. But you were never going to love Arnold Price in that way, and he did not expect it. Goodness, Diana, he was never going to love you as a wife either. You were simply helping one another, company for one another. Love, at least romantic love, was never going to be a part of things for you and Arnold. That's not entirely what I mean. You know you may tell me anything, Diana. You know you may say whatever is in your heart. I am not so detached that I would not understand," Caroline said, and hoped that that was the truth. Was she detached? Had she closed off her heart so that love might never get in? She had certainly closed it against pain, but did closing it not forbid love entry also? "I know I may tell you anything, Caroline, and I know you're not detached. But I think that we have both been a little cynical. There is nothing wrong with wanting to be ourselves and wanting to be appreciated for it. But we did approach it cynically, or at least I did. In the end, I suppose there was never anything wrong with waiting for a man I thought I had a hope of loving. The right man, of course, one who would let me be myself and loved me. But I did not wait, I did not think it mattered. In the beginning, poor Arnold Price was nothing more than prey to me. Whatever you thought in the beginning, you did not think it in the end. I could see your regard for Arnold Price, and I could equally see your care of him. He was a very lonely man, and you made his last weeks far brighter than they would ever have been had he not met you. I beg you to see it that way, Diana. I would not want to see you make the same mistake, Caroline. If you have a hope of meeting a man who not only accepts you, but loves you, that is what you must aim for. You might not find it, but you must aim for it. Let go of the cynicism, for I'm not entirely sure now that love is a vulnerability. In the end, we might both discover that it is strength." She paused for a moment. "You are kind-hearted, Caroline. Others might not see it, but I can. Diana smiled. Well, be sure you do not tell anybody. Caroline smiled and was pleased when Diana finally laughed. When she returned to the Seddon house later that afternoon, Caroline could not shake the feeling of sadness. Poor Diana was suffering, making herself feel terrible, and Caroline could not bear to see it. It had been weeks since Arnold had passed, and already a man who would love Diana was paying some attention. It would have worked out wonderfully, given Diana's new thinking on the idea of love as a strength, not a weakness, had guilt not had a hold of her. Caroline could only hope that Diana would let go of it for long enough to allow love in if that was what she truly wanted. Not to mention the fact that the man in question was a minister and a very good man. He would suit Diana very well. Caroline laughed to herself, thinking that she had suddenly become every bit the matchmaker that Julia Darnley would have been proud. But was Julia Darnley really so wrong? Caroline very much doubted it. She found herself inevitably thinking about Brent and his fine pale blue eyes. His smile was growing on her week by week, as was his ridiculous humor. He continued to call on her, sometimes staying for tea, sometimes doing no more than spending 2 minutes on the doorstep passing the time of day. If only she could know what was in his heart, that would make things much simpler. And whilst she was at it, she would like to know what was in his head also, for she could still not yet discover if he was the sort of man who would marry her and then seek to smother the intelligence clean out of. Of course, he had not asked her to marry him, not once. She had yet to visit his farm, for that would have been a clear indication that he was showing his establishment to her, looking for her approval. Perhaps, in the end, he would not ask her at all. Caroline knew that she was falling for him, she just did not know if she could trust him. He was a man of good class, and Caroline had not had much faith in men of good class throughout her life. That night, Caroline went to bed early without eating much of her dinner. She was quiet, and even Miss Seddon looked a little concerned. But she was not ailing physically, just confused and a little afraid. If she did not marry at all, she had the awful feeling that she would spend the rest of her life living side by side with Nancy Seddon. In truth, she would rather marry Claude, the town drunk, than suffer that fate. She thought all night about Diana's words, how love might actually be a strength rather than a weakness. But if she was beginning to fall in love with Brent Stamford, she could certainly feel a large degree of vulnerability. But was vulnerability weakness? How much easier mathematical propositions were to answer. After all, they were not in the least bit subjective. There were not different points of view, different opinions, different trains of thought. Questions of a scientific nature, when answered, were either right or wrong. There was comfort in it, there was relief in it. Caroline realized that her comfort in studying such subjects was just that, a comfort. It had been a refuge for a young girl in a world where people were capricious, fathers cruel, and society all demanding. Mathematics was none of those things, and it never left her wondering what the answer really was. She just knew it, absolutely and definitively. Why could life not be like that in its entirety? Why could she not simply look upon Brent as nothing more than a mathematical problem to be solved, a problem that would have an answer if she simply applied focus? But life was not like that, it was far more complicated. Caroline could hardly understand why it was that so many people found the sciences difficult when they lived lives that were far more so. There were too many variables, too many uncertainties in life. She could not simply add just enough data so that she might calculate the end result for herself. Everything was subject to change, to movement, to uncertainty. Uncertainty was everything that Caroline had felt in her early life, and she most certainly did not want it now. Uncertainty had been the very thing from which she was fleeing when she had run towards Euclid and the physical sciences in the first place. Why on earth would she go back? Why on earth would she ever make herself vulnerable again? But if she did not, Caroline was certain that she would have no hope of truly discovering the mystery that was Mr. Brent Stamford. Chapter 15. Spring Flowers, Miss Lawton. The first of them to grow on my land. Brent strode into the sitting room brandishing a little handful of daffodils. Goodness, they are early, Caroline said, standing to take them from him. Miss Seddon, who had shown Brent in, sniffed loudly in disapproval before flouncing out of the sitting room. As is spring this year. He smiled and, for once, Brent did not seem to be amused, even as he watched Miss Seddon retreating. These make a very nice gift, Mr. Stamford, Caroline said shyly, wondering if they really were meant as such. She was trying her hardest, but still she could not be certain of the man. Worse still, she knew that it was not his own fault, but her father's, and a product of the way she had been raised. I am taken aback, Miss Lawton. His customary amusement was returning. Why? She asked tentatively, believing she already knew the answer. If you do not mind me saying, you are not ordinarily so gracious. I do mind you saying, Caroline said forcefully and with a distinct lack of the aforementioned grace. I am not trying to insult you, I'm just getting to know you more and more. I can only base my assumptions on experience, and I would think that you, as a mathematician, would appreciate such a scientific approach. You are mocking me, but that is by the by, Caroline said and settled down on the couch, still gently holding the beautiful golden daffodils. The stems felt cold in her palm and something about that and their brightness made her feel curiously optimistic. Even though she and Brent were in the middle of one of their customary rows, still, she felt as if they were about to make a breakthrough. She could hardly explain it, but she knew it by instinct. And instinct was more alien to her than anything. How could she be feeling it now? By the by? He asked humorously. Yes, it is by the by. The fact is, you have not explained what the experiences are which you have based your ridiculous assumptions on. And by the way, your approach is far from scientific, believe me. Despite her words, Caroline could not help but smile at him. For his part, Brent looked truly thrilled. Something was about to change, something was coming. Ordinarily you scowl at me which, for your information, you are doing today. The fact that you accepted my gift of daffodils with grace is something that I had not expected. If I'm honest, I would not have been at all surprised if you had bitten off their heads and swallowed them down with tea. He began to chuckle. Then I wonder that you would have brought them at all. Would that not be a terrible waste of such beautiful flowers? Yes, but it was worth a try. For me to not try would also be a terrible waste. Caroline was almost certain that she knew what he was talking about. In her heart, she believed as well as hoped that he meant that it was worth his effort and risk to keep trying with her. Settled now in an armchair, he looked across to her, smiling with warmth and amusement, his pale blue eyes on hers. He was wearing black breeches, boots, and frock coat, with a pale green waistcoat beneath. The outfit would have been austere had Brent not been the one wearing it. There was a lightness to him, not just his hair, but his very spirit, which could have lifted the dreariest cloth and made it spectacular. Caroline could feel her heartbeat quicken and still didn't know why she had such a sense of change, of excitement. Yes, I suppose it would be a terrible waste, that is, if you are still inclined to keep trying, she said a little cryptically. I am glad you like the daffodils, Miss Lawton, he said, his voice low and rich. I like them very much. They really are a very fine gift. Her mouth felt a little dry and Caroline realized that, on top of everything else, she was nervous. I would have given you Euclid, but it is taking too long. You will have to wait for him. You would have given me Euclid? Caroline said, confused. Well, not the poor man's very bones, of course, he began, but she could see that his light-heartedness was covering some nerves of his own. Just some books. You would give them to me? Caroline said, hardly daring to believe that it was true. Did he mean that he would not stop her learning and growing? Did he mean that he liked her for who she was, rather than in spite of who she was? I will give them to you, Miss Lawton. I have written to my brother, well, some weeks ago now, and asked him to try to locate some of the texts and send them on the next supply ship. You need not look so concerned. I do not think your father will find out. He smiled, but still his humor was hiding a great vulnerability. Vulnerability. Could it ever actually be a strength? My goodness, have you really done such a thing? Caroline, realizing that she was holding the daffodil stems a little too tightly, loosened her grip. Yes, some weeks ago. When you told me that your father had disposed of yours, well, burned them, I thought to replace them for you. But I know you are a proud and haughty creature, so I dare say that I am about to be thoroughly lambasted for my silly idea. He smiled and shrugged as if fully expecting her negativity. You will not be lambasted, Mr. Stamford, Caroline said, and decided to be a little more personal. I will not lambast you, Mr. Stamford. Why would I? This is quite the kindest thing that anybody has ever done for me. I'm sure you have had better gifts. And in any case, you do not have them yet. They are still thousands of miles away. The books themselves will be wonderful, they will bring me back to myself. But it is not the books which are the greatest gift, truly. The greatest gift of all is the idea that you would not only get them for me in the first place, but that you would never seek to deny me the right to read them. That, Mr. Stamford, is the greatest gift. It had finally happened. Caroline knew that the man sitting in front of her, the man who had irritated and amused her for so many weeks, was the very man she had looked for. He was the answer to a prayer she had given up to the heavens so long ago. He was a man who would let her be herself, no matter what. Once again, I'm taken aback, he said, but he was smiling as if he had also been handed a great gift. Perhaps you will be more taken aback when I tell you that I will marry you, Caroline said, her nerves still riding high. But I haven't asked you to marry me, Miss Lawton, he said, and Caroline would have swallowed her own tongue if his words had not been followed up by the cockiest of smiles. He was up to his old tricks, he was feeling confident again, back to normal. He was teasing her, and Caroline realized now that she rather liked it. All right, very well, she said flatly and shrugged in a manner that he would have recognized well by now. Then I shall simply have to ask you, if you are so inattentive to such details. Mr. Stamford, will you marry me? You never disappoint, do you? I hope not, Caroline said and tipped her head forward, raising her eyebrows and squinting at him as she awaited his answer. Of course, I will marry you, he said, and his smile became something gentler. But will you marry me? Yes, I will marry you, Mr. Stamford. At that moment, they both startled as they heard a loud sneeze coming from the other side of the sitting-room door. The eavesdropper, doubtless Miss Seddon, had inadvertently given herself away with an errant particle of dust in her nose. Caroline clapped a hand over her mouth, but in the end the laughter escaped. The more she laughed, the more Brent laughed until they were both quite uncontrollable. The laughter was so great, in fact, that they almost did not hear the clipped footsteps of Miss Seddon disappearing from behind the door and hastening to the kitchen. No doubt Caroline would pay for her amusement later, but it hardly mattered now. She would not be in the Seddons' home for very much longer, and that thought alone gave her great joy. Chapter 16. Caroline had worn her very finest clothes for her wedding day, just 1 week later. The skirt and bodice were a beautiful shade of blue, the very color of cornflowers, and it made her black hair gleam all the more in the weak sunshine of the early spring day. She had gathered her hair in a loose and low knot at the back of her head and tied a brilliant white coif over the top. When she saw Diana's face, she knew she had chosen well. "Oh, Caroline, you look beautiful," Diana said brightly, her own world greatly improved since she had lately married the minister, Jude Robbins. "Thank you." Caroline smiled. "I have been at this all morning, hoping that I would look nice enough to be married." "Brent Stamford is going to be rendered mute, my dear," Diana said. "And has Miss Seddon not helped you at all?" "If door slamming and loud sighing can be considered helpful, then yes," Caroline said, looking over towards the partially open sitting room door and hoping against all hope that Nancy Seddon was on the other side of it. "You will be pleased to be away from that woman," Diana said in a near whisper, creeping across the room and peering around the edge of the door until she was satisfied that the eavesdropper was not present on this occasion. She paused for a moment, listening intently before she finally closed the door fully. "What is it?" Caroline asked and wrinkled her brow. "I can hear crying," Diana said simply. "It seems to be coming from upstairs and I have a feeling that it is Miss Seddon." "Oh dear," Caroline said, feeling a little regretful of her annoyance. "No, I'm not entirely sure she deserves your pity, Caroline. For one thing, I have lately discovered how her interference and spite almost saw Anne Wallace branded a witch before she had the good sense to dash away and marry that handsome Indian fellow." "Really? I had no idea." She had spent some time following her so that she might report to authorities that Anne was making medicines for the Jamestown doctor. She was delighted when Anne was secretly meeting Hewitt and got carried away with her story so much so that she claimed to have heard witchcraft chanting. "So, as I say, your pity would be wasted on such a creature. If she is not married and is in her bed crying as she watches everybody around her making good lives for themselves, does she not only have herself to blame? That was a dreadful thing for her to do. In England, she would likely have seen to it that Anne was burned at the stake. We are not so far away that it would not have happened here too, Caroline. Honestly, I think that it was only the good fortune that she had fallen so deeply in love with that handsome man of hers and moved to live at the settlement which spared her any further trouble. I wish I had known that. Really, if I had thought that Miss Seddon was following Anne whilst I have been here living under this roof, I would have done something," Caroline said, still not able to feel entirely comfortable with the fact that the woman upstairs, as cruel as she was crying. She knew that Diana was right, that Miss Seddon had only herself to blame for her perceived misfortunes. What man in his right mind, knowing of her pernicious and, it would appear, almost murderous ways, would consent to spend the rest of his life with her? Still, Caroline had an analytical mind and realized that the bitterness might well have followed the disappointment, rather than the disappointment following the bitterness. She laughed suddenly, and Diana looked at her. "What are you laughing at?" "I was trying to be quite logical in my mind about the whole thing and found that my logic brought me to a place of compassion. Whoever would have thought that such a thing was possible?" "Not I," Diana said and grinned. "At least I would not have before. I do now." "You are happy now, are you not?" "I am happier than I can say," Diana said, and her eyes shone with tears of joy. "I could not be happier for you, my dear. And what about you, Caroline? This is your day, your marriage, your new life. Let us talk about you for a while, shall we?" "Yes, I am well pleased now that I have found a man who I am certain will not interfere with my character. It was very clever of him to send to his brother for the books." And very caring, Caroline, for he must have seen, even all those weeks ago, how much they meant to you. I do believe he understands you, my dear. I think he must, for he did the one thing that spoke so much of everything else. It is so much more than a simple gift, even though the books have not yet arrived. Caroline laughed and shook her head. But I must admit that I am looking forward to them. And what about everything else? Are you looking forward to your life with Brent Stamford? Yes, I think I am, Caroline said, feeling a little reticence. Really? Diana peered at her closely, seeing right through her. As you once said to me, you may tell me anything that is in your heart. I think I love him, Diana, but I cannot be sure. It is not any problem with Brent, truly, but I think that there is something wrong with me. What on earth could be wrong with you? Diana said, but Caroline could see from her friend's expression that she already had an inkling. I am not entirely sure that I have the capacity for love, Diana. I have been without it for so long and so dead set against it, so afraid of it, that I am beginning to believe now that it will not come to me fully. And it was true, she had been worrying about it for a full week since she had become betrothed to him. Well, perhaps try a different approach. Instead of wondering whether you truly love Brent Stamford, tell me what it is you do feel for him. What words come to mind when you think of his face? Caroline closed her eyes as she stood in the middle of the sitting room, breathing slowly as she imagined the face of the man she was about to marry. He is so handsome, with his fair hair and tan skin. She began, smiling benignly into thin air. And he is always laughing, he sees amusement in anything and everything. How that irritated me at first, but how I came to look forward to it as the days passed, and I hoped that he would return. She opened her eyes for a moment, looking directly at Diana. I suppose there was not much by way of good humor and amusement in my life before that, and so I did not recognize it as a good thing when I first met him. She closed her eyes again. There is a look on his face, a look I saw so many weeks ago. I did not recognize it at the time, or even make much note of it, but it was when we were in the middle of one of our little arguments and I told him that he would no doubt be pleased to hear that my father had burned my books. Diana, he looked at me with such concern, such sadness, and told me that it gave him no pleasure at all. That was the very thing I had wanted to hear. Why did I not recognize it? So many weeks ago, Brent told me everything I needed to know in that one simple sentence. I am only just seeing it now, I am only just making the connection. And how does that make you feel? Safe. Loved. She opened her eyes and smiled. I only hope that I can return so wonderful a favor and love him too. Well, I suppose you will have to marry him first. He'll be waiting, won't he? Diana reached out and took her hand. We must go, or he will think you're not coming. Chapter 17. So, how's married life treating you, my dear fellow? Jack Thornton asked as he and Brent sat on the steps of his farmhouse staring out across the land. It was the end of the working day, but it was not yet dark. Spring was here, and the days were getting longer and longer. There was a chill in the air, but Brent liked the feel of it against the skin of his face. I must admit, I am enjoying it thoroughly, Brent said, chuckling as he leaned his back into the step behind him. Who would have thought it, Jack? The both of us finally married, and we did not even have to move back to England to achieve it. These last weeks have flown, haven't they? I can hardly believe how much has happened in so short a space of time. But I suppose things have happened more slowly for you. Jack shrugged. Or perhaps not, because my own wife has only lately warmed to me and your wife had already warmed to you by the time you were married. Yes, I see what you mean. Brent stared off at the setting sun. The truth was, he was not entirely sure that his new wife had warmed to him completely. He knew that he loved Caroline Lawton. He had fallen in love with her within days of their first meeting. And he was certain that she was in love with him also, he just did not know how much. Their wedding had gone well, and Brent had been speechless when he saw just how beautiful Caroline looked. She had put in so much effort, an effort he had not expected of her, and it had thrilled him to his very bones. His wife had wanted to look well on the day that she married him, and she had absolutely no idea at all just how much it had meant to him. The one thing which had pleased him about the length of time it had taken the two of them to walk down the aisle was the fact that they already knew each other to some degree, and so their new life together was nowhere near as awkward as it might otherwise have been. Surprisingly, Caroline had seemed to enjoy his kisses and his embrace, settling into every aspect of married life in a way he would never have dreamed of so many weeks before. She had even immediately involved herself in the day-to-day running of the farm, finding herself little jobs to do and asking him how it was she could help. Remembering how she had done battle with one of the hens in an attempt to liberate the eggs caused him to suddenly laugh out loud. "What is it?" Jack said and turned to look at him. "Or should I not ask?" He chuckled a little wickedly. Last week, Caroline had gone out into the barn to collect some eggs. Now, I know she's very different from many ladies of her class, but it was clear to me immediately that she had never done a day's physical work in her entire life. In fact, it would surprise me to know that she ever had. Nonetheless, out she went, a little basket in one hand and an apron over the top of her skirt and bodice. She was quite a sight, very appealing. Brent said and bit his bottom lip before continuing. Anyway, she marched into the barn and I followed, keen to see how she would manage it. And, in Caroline's true style, she went at it boldly and with no finesse at all. Oh dear, how did the hen take it? Very badly, my dear fellow. There was no coaxing, no gentleness. Caroline simply gripped the hen's tail feathers and lifted them up, ready to reach beneath her and steal the eggs. He laughed heartily. The furor which ensued was of a type I have never seen before in my life. He shook his head as Jack roared with laughter. The hen turned on her, of course, pecking at her hands and squealing. What did Caroline do? She fought back. There was no turning and running for Caroline. She simply stood her ground and continued to try to snatch the eggs, despite the fact that the hen pecked at her until she drew blood. And did she get the eggs in the end? No, I had to pull her away, something she was not at all pleased about, he went on as Jack winced humorously. Still, she did not shy away from going in the very next day and putting into practice everything I had told her. If nothing else, my wife is a very quick learner. She needs only to hear a thing once and that knowledge is hers forever. The hen, of course, as much as she capitulates now, will never forgive her, that much is clear. But Brent had not finished the story in its entirety, keeping it to himself and only revisiting it in his mind as he slowly rode home from the Thornton farm to his own. It really had been amusing, the whole thing, but there was a sadness to it also. After he had pulled his wife away from the hen and she had finally stopped struggling with him, Brent had tentatively shown her how to do it by example. The simplest thing to do with the hen is to distract her, and the best way to distract her is to set down a little food, he'd said, taking a handful of grain from a wooden barrel and approaching the sitting hen with caution. He had begun to spread the grain a few feet away from where the hen sat on the eggs, and he heard Caroline draw in her breath as the hen simply got up and waddled over, content to eat the grain as Brent relieved her of her eggs. He had laid the eggs gently in the basket that Caroline still held in her hand, hardly daring to look up into her eyes for fear that she would be angry. But when he did finally look up, there was no such sentiment in her eyes. He realized then, of course, that Caroline was not too proud to be taught something. The fact was, she was a clever woman who relished the learning and was still in want of something to keep her active brain occupied whilst they waited for the books to come in on the supply ship. But whilst she did not look angry, he could see that Caroline looked a little crestfallen, as if she had failed somehow. "I know that you will soon get the hang of it, Caroline. You are clever enough, too clever, and determined enough, for certain." "Yes, but I am not skilled enough, Brent." He hated to admit it, but it was true. Caroline had the sharpest mind of any person he had ever met, but her manual dexterity left much to be desired. She was much clumsier than he had ever realized when he had been courting her, although he had held off teasing her about it, sensing that something was not quite right with her. "I hope that you will not let that upset you or take your confidence, Caroline. We are all skilled in different things, in different ways, and I'm sure that you would not think any less of me to realize that I have no skill at all with mathematics and all the things which interest you. We are just different, that is all. I would say to you that we cannot all be good at everything, but I sense with you that you might think it an insult." "No, I do not think it an insult at all, Brent," she said and leaned against him, allowing him to wrap an arm around her shoulders. "I just need something to do, something which will interest me and occupy me." "I know, my love. I am just not sure that farming is it," he said and smiled. "No, perhaps not. Perhaps I will find something else to occupy me," she said, and he had seen in her eyes then something which had taken him aback and had hardly left his mind since. It was as if the light had faded, as if her hopes for life had suddenly been denied her. It looked like resignation to him, and he couldn't bear to see it. Brent loved her so much, he would not sit on his haunches and watch a beautiful, frighteningly intelligent young woman wither and fade, her skills never put to any use. But what use could they be on a farm? As he rode along in the fading light, keen as ever to get home to his beloved Caroline, Brent smiled to himself. He suddenly had an idea, one even better than his plan to procure the books for her. It would take some doing, in fact, it might never be achieved, but the idea that he must try made him feel suddenly very optimistic. And Brent knew then, as he had known on the very day of his marriage, that he would do anything in the world for Caroline. Chapter 18. Caroline watched with interest as Mrs. Braden, Brent's housekeeper-cum-cook, made pastry for an apple pie. It really was a most restful thing to see, watching as the ingredients all came together to just the right consistency, and the almost hypnotic way that Mrs. Braden rolled the pastry out once it was ready. But Caroline realized that she much preferred to watch it than to take part, something which she was certain Mrs. Braden was very pleased about. The two women had got along very well from the beginning, especially since Caroline had professed to have no skills whatsoever in terms of the domestic matters of the home. She was quite apologetic, but Mrs. Braden seemed for all the world as if she would be keen for her mistress never to know the mysteries of domesticity. After all, it would keep her gainfully employed, wouldn't it? For her part, Caroline was pleased that Mrs. Braden did not pour silent scorn on her for her lack of skill in that area, for she had fully imagined that the dear woman would see her as nothing more than a pampered woman of a privileged upbringing. Still, she had very quickly seen the truth, realizing that Caroline was absolutely willing to try anything and be set to any task. She was perfectly happy folding bed linen when it came in fresh and dry from the line. Mrs. Braden had been amazed by the absolute precision with which every fold was made, all of the corners tightly together, not half an inch out of place. Caroline had no doubt that it was her own peculiar personality rather than any true aptitude for laundry, but she felt it redeemed her a little at least. And whenever she could, she prepared little meals, simple plates of bread and cheese and endless hot drinks for the housekeeper she hoped would stay forever. As much as Caroline wanted something to occupy her, she knew that domesticity was not it. As much as she had longed for some way to contribute, she realized now that such a contribution would only truly mean anything to her if it was connected with her own talents. But how on earth could she contribute such talents and have them mean anything at the farm? She felt useless, and she could feel her spirits sinking day by day. She felt so guilty to see the look of concern on her handsome husband's face as he clearly realized that his wife was not entirely happy. Surely, he must feel as if he had made a grave error in marrying her in the first place, or perhaps he even thought her such a spoiled young woman that nothing would ever please her. But that could not be further from the truth, and Caroline wished that she could find the courage to simply talk to him about it. And then, once you have laid the pastry in the bottom of the pan, you set these dried peas in it before cooking the base. That way it will not be able to rise before you are ready for it to, if you see what I mean? Mrs. Braden said, breaking across her miserable thoughts. Yes, the weight of the peas will keep the pastry nice and flat, Caroline said, her little victory hardly raising a smile. Oh dear, am I interrupting? Brent said, surprising both Caroline and Mrs. Braden with his sudden and very early appearance in the kitchen. Not at all, sir, Mrs. Braden said, as if relieved that she could simply get on with making her apple pie without having to explain every part of it. Then may I steal my wife away for a little while? He looked at the housekeeper hopefully. Of course, sir. She turned to smile at Caroline kindly, and Caroline returned the smile with equal warmth. What is it? You are home very early today, Brent, Caroline said with some concern when the two of them were finally seated side by side on the broad and comfortable couch in the sitting room. Mrs. Braden had lit a fire earlier just to take the chill of the spring air, and it was now wonderfully warm and extremely cozy. The whole house was cozy, so much homelier and more comfortable than anywhere she had ever lived before. Even though she had concerns in the life she was now leading, Caroline knew that she had never been more relaxed and at her ease anywhere in her life. This was where she was meant to be, she knew that. I know, I am a little early. I hope I have not distressed you. He grinned at her and her spirits was easily lifted. Brent smiled and laughed all the time, finding humor in everything, and Caroline knew that he would make her life a thing worth living. She only hoped that she could get to the bottom of her own angst and do the same for him. You have not distressed me, Brent, she said and leaned forward, turning on the couch to look at him fully. There is not something wrong on the farm, is there? I have no idea, I have not been there all day, he said, still grinning. I can tell that you have something to say, Brent, from the cocky expression on your face, Caroline said and began to smile. And I can also tell that you are going to drag it out as long as possible so that you can get the very most enjoyment out of my not knowing what it is. How well you know me in so short a space of time. He was chuckling. Oh, just tell me. Caroline said and slapped his thigh hard. Ouch, he said, widening his eyes, his face a hilarious mask of mock agony. Just tell me, Caroline repeated, wriggling away from him when he tried to put his arms around her. Or I shall stay on the other side of this couch for the rest of my life. Well, my little wasp, I will tell you, he said, a look of the purest satisfaction on his face. I have spoken to a number of people today. Well, men, actually, for they seem to run things here. He shook his head and shrugged as if the idea was perfectly ridiculous. Anyway, it has taken me many hours, but I have finally persuaded the great and the good of this struggling little colony that we need fine minds to teach the few children that we do have and the undoubted swell in numbers that is bound to come from so many marriages. What does that mean? Caroline asked, feeling excitement start to build in her chest. She halted it immediately, closing it off as she closed off so much of feeling in her life, lest it disappoint her, lest it hurt her. We are to have a school, Caroline. And it is for everybody. Farmers' children, innkeepers' children, architects' children, whoever would care to have their child thoroughly educated. Please get to the point, my love, Caroline said and wrinkled her nose. Am I to be a part of it or not? You are teasing me in the worst possible moment, and if you do not desist, I will likely bite you. She laughed. Her nerves were suddenly swelling, her palms perspiring and her heartbeat quickening. She knew then that she loved him dearly, she really loved him. She was excited for whatever news he was about to give her and realized then that she must surely be a part of things, for Brent would never have come to her with tales of anything less. He loved her, he would never hurt her. And even if she did not have a part in it all, Caroline knew now that she had married the only man in all the world she could ever have loved so fully. She had found the one man who would courageously approach others, those who would scoff and mock him for his suggestions, if only to see his beloved wife was happy. He did not simply accept her for who she was, he admired her for it, he wanted her to be just exactly the person she was before they had married. Before you say anything else, Brent, and no, I have decided not to bite you, she said and laughed when he pulled a face of relief. No, I will not bite you. Before you say anything else, I want you to know that I love you. I really love you, Brent Stamford. You have changed my life so much for the better, and I will always be grateful to you for that. You are always stoically yourself, no matter what, and you are pleased for me to be the same. I could never have asked for anything more, except that you love me. And now I know, without a doubt, that you do. More importantly, I now know how much I love you, how much I always shall. Goodness, that was quite a speech, Brent said, laughing but only lightly as he reached out and laid a hand on her cheek. I do not think I have ever heard you say so many sentences together in all the time I have known you. I would tell you to stop teasing me, but I think I have come to like it. That is a good thing, for it would be a long life if you did not. Brent pulled her into his arms and kissed her. He was so handsome, and his kisses so passionate, that Caroline almost forgot what they had been discussing. So, do you want to know the rest? He said, releasing her so that he might continue. Oh yes, please. You are to be a part of it, of course you are. The governor realizes, as do his ardent followers, the importance of educating everybody in the colony if it is ever to be successful. So, they are going to find others who are keen to help, but you are to be the main teacher of mathematics and the sciences, given that nobody else would dare to show themselves up for a lack of such knowledge. They actually said that? No, I added the last part myself, but I'm certain it is true. He paused and winced. I am afraid that I had to peddle it to them as if you and some other ladies might act as governesses of sorts, doing what you could to give a little bit of education to those who might not otherwise have it. It was the only way I could get them to agree to it, I'm afraid. They have their arrogance and pride, and sometimes one simply has to work with it for a while rather than pound against it. You have not worked with it, you have gone around it, you clever, clever man. She threw her arms around his neck again. How could I not? All I want in this world is for you to be happy, and I know that means doing the things you love the best. I love you, Caroline, and I will make it my life's work to make sure that you are always happy. Epilogue. My dearest uncle, I am so pleased to have received your letter, for now I can be sure you know of my marriage to my wonderful Brent Stamford. I do hope this letter finds you well and am bound to say that I still miss you very much. To see your letter made me feel better, your handwriting like a spider trotting through ink always makes me smile. I have more news for you, news which is quite amazing. I am now one of 2 ladies who teach the few children we have here in the colony. Of course, there will soon be more once the flurry of marriages here begin to bear fruit. For now, however, I am thrilled with my handful of charges. My companion teaches reading and writing whilst I teach arithmetic and a little basic natural science. As the children grow, I will be able to teach something more advanced, but I am wonderfully content, nonetheless. I can hardly believe how much my life has changed, turning into something I would never have dared to even dream of back in England. To have my own talents not only allowed, but recognized and used, sees me living the most wonderful life I could ever have lived. I love my husband very much, a thing which has come as a great surprise to me. When I left England, I had never thought to have love, I had never even known to search for it. I had been proud and even a little arrogant, decrying others' need for love as a weakness. But I was wrong. I am now stronger than I have ever been, strong because I have been brave enough to open my heart to another. We have all found such joy here in Jamestown, the 6 of us ladies who were nervously billeted together all those months ago in Gravesend. Constance Dearborn has forgotten the man who betrayed her and gone on to realize she loves her new husband more than life itself. Then there is Anne Wallace, using her skills as an apothecary in her new family of native Indians. Dear little Grace Bates is living a wonderful life with a wealthy man who loves her dearly, no longer the nervous servant with nothing but her dreams to keep her going. Julia Darnley, that wonderfully romantic woman, has lived her dream, turning a man without a romantic bone in his body to a most attentive and passionate being. And my dearest friend, Diana, finally married for love and nothing better, her heart as open as my own is now. We have all made it, we have all thrived. This new life has worked for us all, despite the obstacles each one of us has faced on her own personal journey, the journey which is, in truth, so much harder than the odor-ridden and nauseating open sea could ever have been. I will always be grateful to you for helping me to get here and am pleased that you have finally told my father. He cannot interfere in my life now that I am married, but I have grown enough in my heart not to be so thrilled by the idea of his never knowing what has become of me. I do not want revenge, I have no need for it. Everything I could ever want to make me happy is here in my life today, and, when I look at it with logic, I would never have had any of this had my father not acted as he did. If he had not been so cruel, I would never have run. I would not be here, I would never have known my beloved Brent. What my father did will never be made right, but it can be consigned to the past without clinging on to the old feelings which almost kept my heart closed. When I think of how I might have risked everything, I am grateful to have found the courage to let go of my old life and open my heart. Well, I shall look forward to your next letter and will keep you fully informed of the lives of the 6 women who set off on this most terrible, wonderful journey side by side. In the meantime, take good care of yourself and know that I will be forever grateful to you, my dear uncle. With much love, Caroline. Thank you for listening to Open Your Heart to Love, part of a new love for the Jamestown Bride series by best-selling historical romance author Indiana Wake. If you enjoyed this heartfelt romance, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next audiobook release in the series.